Hey everybody, welcome to the Sunday show this afternoon here. It is the 1st of September 2024 if you're watching us like live. If you're not, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you tune in live? Live's where the show's at. Live's where the audience gets to interact and chat. And live's how you know exactly when you should call. 720-619-2288. The phone lines are open and live. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Seth Andrews. How are you, sir?
I'm well. I thought of you this morning. I had a memory pop up on Facebook, no R. It was when you and I had toured the Ark Encounter. We went to, I forgot what the occasion was, but we ended up touring Ken Ham's, giant $100 million paperweight together. And the sound of our brain cells exploding as we were going from exhibit to exhibit, most of which I think the Ark was just empty space and a bunch of stuff on the wall to read, as I recall. But I thought of you. It's hard to believe it's been 7 years. So
I think that may have been something to do with the Kentucky Free Thought Convention, but it might have been another convention in the area. I'm not sure. I'm glad I went, but I will say, it was largely unimpressive. It very much, like, I think you could turn that entire Ark Encounter into like a coffee table book where one of the big plaques that you had to stand there and read is just the left page, and then a picture of the display could be the right page. You get a really good coffee table book out of it and not have to build a big monstrous installation. I wondered if it was mostly empty or appeared mostly empty as a way of countering the notion that trying to cram all of those animals into a boat that size would make it cramped. And I wonder if they intentionally left open space, or if it's just, hey, we want people to be able to tour. Who knows?
When we saw the cages of velociraptors, I thought, well, is that a kind or a species? Is a kind or a species? It's mostly, I thought, he needed state-of-the-art construction equipment and $100 million, and I'm supposed to believe that Noah did it pretty much single-handedly at the age of 500 using only trees and tar. And of course, I think the Ark Encounter tour was a couple of years after I caught the Creation Museum. Have you been inside that place?
I have not.
Okay. Well, it's just as horrifying. My favorite part of the Creation Museum is the exhibit. Well, there are two. One that talked about how that the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden are responsible for weeds, and actually has, Adam's out there tilling the garden and there are sprouting weeds. And it's like, shit, we didn't have weeds before this forbidden act of fruit munching. And then if you turn the corner, it is an exhibit defending incest. I mean, it actually just says, did they commit incest in the Bible? And you and I would think, oh, this is a parody, it's a joke, it's a it's somebody altered a photograph of the exhibit. No, that's the exhibit. Ken Ham's talking about how back in Bible times, the Lord actually had incest as part of his divine plan for repopulating the earth. And I was in a group of atheists. We just looked at each other like, are we on candid camera? Are we on TV? Is this a joke? Is this going to be a TikTok video? So anyway, we paid the admission fees so you don't have to, everybody.
Yeah.
Because I took it in the teeth from a few people. Why would you pay money to take these tours? And for me, the cost benefit was I got enough mileage out of it and was able to expose it on the wavelength that tons of other people didn't have to. That's how I rationalize it anyway. So.
Now, somebody else paid for me to when we went to the Ark thing. It was gratis on behalf of, I think it was a Kentucky Free Thought Convention. I'm not sure. I think it's one of those things where it's worth it for some portion of the community to go ahead and pay and get a look, so you know what you're talking about when you talk about it. Um, it's a done deal. It's not like I think the prices were ridiculous too, wasn't it? Like
It was like
50 or
40
$60 or
something
something.
plus $10 to park, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Just wild. Um, but you were talking about the weeds and the apologetics surrounding incest, and of course, I've heard Ken Ham and others talk about how, well, we've got a young Earth, and the reason that Adam and Eve and the other ancestors of humanity lived to be 900 plus years old is because they were more genetically pure, and so it was okay to commit incest there. And I was like, hang on, that would preserve kind of the genetic purity. Like, there's less variation if you're breeding like line bred traits. And it's, I mean, as somebody who breeds animals, it's one of the various discussions about how much do you need to get outside of your current breeding group. Where does line bred traits potentially do harm? But you were like, that's why we have weeds. And it struck me that in the same way they use kinds instead of species. So species is it's not even a crisply defined concept within biology, but it's much more crisply defined than kind is. And similarly, what's a weed? A weed's just a plant that we're not fond of. I mean, you might not like dandelions. You might call dandelions weeds, but they're useful, and people make dandelion wine. And my, I've got lizards that love things like dandelions. It's everything is antiquated. It's this before before any revolution in thought, any enlightenment, before we had a good understanding of biology, where we can, hey, this is a species, or hey, this is a plant versus or a weed. Wait, weeds are still plants. It's
Yeah.
weeds are just the ones you don't like, or oh no, they're the ones with thorns, but roses have thorns. What's the difference?
I think when Erika Gutzik Gibbon toured it, she was talking about how Ken Ham's pitching that humankind could not have evolved from the lower primates. Right? He rejects, I think, that we even are primates. And she was revealing that they just skipped a whole bunch of steps, like transitional steps, as far as the evolution of the human primate, and the size of our brain cases and the articulating limbs and our genetic similarities to the other primates. And they just sort of decided they were going to take a leap over that chasm and say it was impossible. It really is an assault on the senses. And I think one of the things that bothered me the most, and I've had a lot of fun with that video. If you want to watch it, anybody, Atheists at the Creation Museum and Atheists at the Ark Encounter are the name of the videos. But what really bothered me is when I was at the Creation Museum, I saw what may have been a homeschool group or some seriously small private school group. It was a couple of parents, guardians, maybe a teacher, I couldn't tell, 3 or 4 or 5 adults, and then there was a gathering of maybe a dozen young, impressionable children, and they were walking them from exhibit to exhibit to exhibit, and these wide-eyed kids were just lapping it all up. And if you look at the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum, they really are, they're propaganda for shame. The whole underlying message is you're unworthy, you're dirty, you're broken. We don't deserve any of the goodness that we have brought to us by God. Thank God he came to rescue us from ourselves. And that message being poured into the minds of these young kids who think it's science, who think it's history, who think it's morality, that broke my heart. And that's what I think I carried with me the most in the days, weeks, and months afterward. Is, I was one of those kids. They would drag him into a religious alternate reality, sell it as truth, and it actually altered the trajectory of the rest of my life. It altered how I felt about myself, and it created a bubble that it took me decades to get out of. And so we have a lot of fun poking at Ken Ham, but the truth is the stuff that he and his like are doing, they're tremendously destructive and damaging, and they have to be countered and stood against.
It's wild because, and maybe we'll get to this point someday in the future. We have statues to gods that nobody, all right, somebody, but generally speaking, nobody cares about. Nobody gives a crap. It's like Oh, here's a thing of Dionysus, and yes, there's somebody out there. But I'm wondering, at what point does the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter just get turned into a reminiscent sort of, well, almost like a Meow Wolf art installation? Like, I want things that are fun. And so we can go to amusement parks, we can go to museums, we can go and do this educationally, or we can go to art exhibits that are fun. I haven't actually been to a Meow Wolf exhibit in person, but I know a little bit about it. I'd love to go. And I think there's one in Dallas. But when do the creation museums get to become that? Because if they were that, if it was, let's go tour this homage to a fanciful story of a flood and dinosaurs and other stuff, and if you removed, the actual doctrinal things from it, it could be like a cool look back at the things people used to believe, just like we see in other amusement parks. It just isn't that now, and that's the problem. Is we're it's like, you know putting someone in a lab coat gives the impression that they know what they're talking about. And building an actual physical Ark museum thing gives the impression that there's something there other than this antiquated story. And, they get to spend their money on whatever they want. They get to, that's not the issue. It's when I'm with you, when we're seeing something that's not true, portrayed as true, in conflict with things that we know to be true. That's huge. I mean, there's a lot to, every parent's going to screw up, and all of their kids are probably going to need therapy. Um, but I think the same thing is true for everyone who grew up with religious teaching. We're all going to have all kinds of wild baggage. It reminds me, I've watched. All right, we're going to call it just a second. I've watched every episode of The West Wing at least 10 times. I've watched it start to finish multiple times. And on a couple of occasions, I found myself remembering something from The West Wing as if it happened in reality. I'll catch myself and be like, oh, wait, that didn't happen. That was a West Wing episode, you know. But what about people who aren't as good at catching this? What about they've read their fantasy book and seen their images of these things so many times that it just de facto gets positioned equal to reality, and then they share that with their kids as if it's equal to what we understand about reality. There's a lot of work to do. We have some
Why do
job
you hate
security
God?
for that.
Why do you hate God, Matt? You just want to sin. I mean,
Yeah,
if we're going to be honest about it, you just want to
yeah,
be a
I do.
God yourself. You rebel. You rebel.
I do. I worship myself. I worship my intellect. I am my own God.
Yep.
The thing
Yep.
is, if I were God, I'd be a better God than any of them that have ever been proposed. I mean, I probably still screw up on occasion, but um, there's some stuff that I would and wouldn't do that doesn't mesh with the other gods that are proclaimed. But I don't know. What
I'm
the hell do
telling
I
you,
know?
I have been touring with a piece of material that's going to publish to YouTube in 4 weeks, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. And the speech is called Seth Andrews versus God. Who is the better intelligent designer? Because I was raised in this sort of look at the pretty trees and look at how finely tuned everything is. And it's amazing that our bodies even function. This is all evidence, it's all around us of a master blueprints that was created by a master designer. And of course, once you step out of that happy, clappy bubble and start to see what the world, what our bodies, what reality looks like, you think, well, I could have done a whole lot better. And this speech actually does that. We get into why does our main source of light give us cancer? And why do our jaws not have enough space for wisdom teeth? And why do our joints wear out? And why does our eyesight? Like Ken Ham's always talking about how beautiful the eye was designed, and the guy's wearing freaking glasses, scientifically prescribed lenses for vision correction. I just go through a bullet point of about 50 examples of how I could be a better designer than the intelligent designer. That's going to drop, I think, on the 24th to YouTube, and I'll throw the link out on all my pages. But I'm with you. Like, let's go head to head. Let's make it a contest. Me and Yahweh, because I think I could win that. I think most of us could win that contest pretty easily.
Yeah, on virtually every front. Now, granted, I'm not going to be able to, you know, design a complex biological mechanism from scratch. But then I don't I don't think that's what any god ever did either. Um, but when it comes to designing a system, um, I I know more about building an automobile from scratch than somebody who existed before there was an internal combustion engine. Somebody who existed before, we had not because I'm smarter, not because I'm a genius, but just because I have direct experience with it. That's the way reality works. We're building on the knowledge of the people who came before us. And what religions generally seem to be doing is holding us back from doing that. Because it is aimed inward and backward instead of outward and forward. And so it's hindering progress. It's all about what's going on in your mind, in your heart, and it's constantly putting up hindrances and roadblocks. And so when we understand something better, like speciation, like biological diversity, we get a better understanding of how the world works. And it tends to be religion that stands up and says, "Oh, whoa, 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 wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, you're going too fast. No, that we're not convinced that that's true." And then they battle against something that shouldn't be a problem for them for a long period of time. They're going to battle against biological evolutionary theory. They're going to battle against human sexuality and diversity. They're going to battle against any number of things that they are convinced are a problem for their theistic worldview. And I mean, I've said incorrect things about it, so I'm not going to reference like the library at Alexandria and stuff. But the number of times that a religion has slowed the progress of humans just so that we can maintain and hang on to cherished beliefs is staggering. And it happens on a daily basis with real people. Like my
Well, not to
mom
belabor it.
is
Oh, forgive me. Go
stuck.
ahead.
No,
Forgive me.
no,
Go
like
ahead.
my
Your
mom is
mom, I want
stuck.
to hear this story. I want to hear this story. Your mom, what? Because I want to know.
Well, no, she's saying she's been stuck without any new understanding of the world, and may even think that the world is flat, all because everything starts and ends with a very narrow view of Jesus and who Jesus is and who should be in charge of her life.
Well, I think, too, not to belabor it, but complexity is amazing and often wonderful. But this idea that something being complex is proof of an engineer is ridiculous, because engineers will tell you that the best versions of a design are the most optimized, the least unnecessarily complex. And so when we see, all of this unnecessary stuff in our genetic code and all of this stuff superfluous that isn't needed by the mechanisms in operation around us all the time, I think, well, complexity is amazing. It's interesting. It should be explored, but it doesn't dictate that an engineer made it complex. In fact, it might actually nullify the claim that an engineer did it because it's unnecessarily so. And I thought that was kind of an interesting angle to take. I think Gutsick Gibbon has talked about that. Forrest has probably mentioned it. People much smarter than me.
Well, if you're ready, we got a few calls lined up and we can get started on the Sunday show. For those of you who are watching, 720-619-2288 is the phone number to call in. But if you look at the description below the video, you'll find a bunch of links down there, including ways to support the network, including linemerch.com, patreon.com/calltheline, and other things like that. You'll also find the information down there about the hosts and who's on, but there's a web link at the top to allow you to call in through Call-In Studio. I'll remind you that if you're using your cell phone to call in through Call-In Studio, it's going to use a web browser on your cell phone, and your phone can fall asleep while you're waiting because you might be on hold for quite a while. If you're listening and you hear us take your call, and it doesn't seem like we can hear you, just tap your phone to wake it up and tap on the browser, and that'll refresh that. We're also going to be making judicious use of the hold button just because of the delays. I'm going super Zen mode so that Seth looks like the incredible assholish monster that he wishes he could be, but can't.
I was told I have a temper problem. I was on the air with Eve last week, and some guy called, and I think I was going through a litany of reasons why I thought the Old Testament God was just a nightmare and why the scenario of Adam and Eve, Noah, etc., were all bullshit. But I was pretty calm voiced, and his reply was that I was apparently had lost my temper, and that became a running punchline. So apparently I'm
Yes.
just loaded with rage. I'm unhinged, man. I'm
It's
unhinged.
it's all I
Beware.
can do to be on the same show with you. It's incredibly frustrating. Here we go. Calling from New York, Brad, pronouns are he, him, is an atheist asking, is it inherently harmful to believe things that aren't true? Hey, Brad, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Pretty
Well,
good.
Can you hear me okay?
I'm itchy, but
You're itchy?
yes. I'll save the story for
Okay.
later. Ignore it. What's up, Brad?
So I've been thinking a lot about the nature of truth, and effectively along the lines of if a benign lie, a little white lie, to call it, leads to a reduction in harm, does it matter that it's not true?
Well, does it matter? Sure, to somebody at some point. That whether or not it's true doesn't change what its impact is. It's entirely possible that the best thing you could do under some circumstance might be to lie.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the reason why I thought of this is I have kind of a core philosophy of I want to ensure maximum human well-being while minimizing human suffering. And it makes me think a bit, Matt, about your philosophy of I want to believe as many true things as possible and as few false things as possible. And I'm
Yep.
thinking how those things can conflict and also collaborate to lead to a better society. And I'm seeing some conflicts where, okay, this thing may be true. However, for the sake of minimizing some degree of harm, usually psychological or emotional, it may not always be the best, and vice versa. Obviously, sometimes we need hard truths.
So we're kind of talking about two different things. One is when I say I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, I'm basically saying I'd like my internal model of reality to match reality. That's different from whether or not knowingly spreading misinformation is the optimal thing to do. Now, Sam Harris published a book called Lying, where he basically argues that there's no circumstances under which it's the right thing. Even if you've got Anne Frank in your attic and they're knocking at your door to ask, do you have Anne Frank in your attic? Um, his response seemed to be that there's some way to reply other than a lie. And there may be, but I disagree that I need to find something other than a lie. If I'm protecting somebody in my attic and the people who are coming to kill that person show up at the door and ask if that person's in my attic, I think the right thing to do is to lie. That's different from me knowing the truth.
Okay, so I think I see where my interpretation kind of had a disconnect with yours, in that. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm kind of putting words in your mouth. It seems like yours is your internal monologue, and then also you're looking at how information is spread generally throughout society. And I think my perspective on that was solely talking internally, and I can give an example if you'd like.
No, I'm just saying, I mean, I think that's kind of accurate. That
Okay.
one thing that it could be true. Here's a statement. In this situation, it would be best to lie. It is entirely possible for that statement to be true in a situation. And I would like to know under which situations that is actually true. And that counts as a true thing to know.
Yeah, and I think we could make reasonable determinations of, what's going to happen. Like if somebody was just in like a deadly car accident and they're very clearly mentally shaken, and then their passenger in the car had died. I don't think, even though it is a lie, it would necessarily be harmful to say, "Oh, they're in the hospital," which even then is only half a lie, because they could still be in the hospital even though they're already deceased. I think I was also thinking along the lines of, say, something like a spiritual or supernatural belief, not necessarily religious, because I think it's very clear that we can demonstrate the harm that religion's done. But like, here's a quick and easy example. My grandma died about 7 years ago. She used to believe that you would make your vision worse if you read with the lights off. So there have been occasions where I'll be sitting with my mom, I'll be at their house visiting and reading in the living room, and the light will just turn on. Now, the common sense answer is, oh, somebody sat on the light switch, or the dog hit it, or something. But there's just like a fun little belief that it's grandma that turned the light on because we were reading. And something like that to me doesn't seem harmful either. Or would you say that there could be harm that comes from being, what's the word I'm looking for, like predisposed to believing those sorts of things?
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. I don't know either. That's why I was asking.
I don't know, Seth. Where are you on the lying versus truth stuff?
I read the Sam Harris book and I came away with the same take. I'm not a fan of absolutism and this idea that situational. I think it really case by case, we have to determine how we proceed to do what Dan Barker has called acting to minimize harm. And so to make a blanket statement that everything has to be all 100% true, the Anne Frank analogy is so good. I've used the situation where I'm at home and a woman shows up, a battered spouse, partner, or whatever, and she's escaping an abusive partner, and she says, please shelter me, please keep me safe, and we welcome her in. And then, the abuser shows up with intent to do harm and says, is she in there? Well, the moral thing is to literally try to nullify the danger. And you say, no, she's not here, go away. While we're waiting for the police to arrive, etc. We want to act to minimize harm. Now, on the surface, I was deceitful. I lied, but I was acting morally. And so as far as the more benign type stuff, is grandma looking down on us and turning on the light switches? I don't really sweat that stuff, with the caveat that we don't want to foster too much a scenario where we encourage people to untether themselves from reality. So I really don't want to too much foster a mindset of when something happens, my default is going to be there's a supernatural membrane where the spirits of our dead relatives are interacting with the physical world. It's fun, it's playful. Natalie and I do it. Her grandfather was named Fritz, and he passed away, and he had a mammoth place in Natalie's heart. And when he died, she was devastated. And so we have this sort of running thing in our house that Fritz is always looking in. Well, and this sounds kind of funny, but every house we've been in, there has always been on the front porch. Whenever we move in somewhere, it just happens within a few months, there is like a toad, on the porch, obviously eating the insects from the porch light, attracted by the porch light. And Natalie's like, that's Fritz. My grandpa's here. He's guarding the door, And we laugh and wink at each other, and it's not Fritz. But we take comfort in that, and we enjoy sharing the story. And every time I walk out to get the mail, or we let Linus out, I'm like, oh, Fritz is at the door. He says hi. We pull up and we can see him in the little nook in the entryway. There's Grandpa Fritz. That kind of thing doesn't really bother me as much, as long as it doesn't become a chronic untethering from the real world. But the playful stuff, I think, whatever, go for it. Go with it. That's my take.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. I think the reason why this even came up for me is because, like I said, my family has views like that are harmful, or sorry, harmless, not harmful. But my parents specifically have a propensity to have non-falsifiable claims about things that have actual answers. Like, for example, my dad's an election denier, and when I asked what would convince you that the election was not stolen, he couldn't answer it because nothing will convince him. And so that's why I had mentioned like a predisposition earlier, because I'm concerned slightly that, sorry, I'm looking for phrasing.
No, Brad, let me see if I can phrase it for you. I'm supposed to be a communicator.
Sure.
Are you worried that some of these more benign beliefs might serve as kind of a gateway to more destructive beliefs? If we allow the crumbs, then before you know it, they're biting into the entire toxic meal kind of thing?
Not on my part, but on the part of my parents and some of my direct relatives. I've moved my mom pretty consistently on social issues recently, but my dad is still where he's at, and it's frustrating. It's getting to the point where he's not going to be around for maybe 10 years max. But then what'll happen is it's just very difficult for me to even want to interact with him. I know this is kind of turning into a therapy session all of a sudden.
Well, I'm underqualified. I am underqualified.
Yeah, I just see that gateway happening there.
I mean, there are areas where we just kind of play around and have fun. There are areas where we tell each other stories. I can watch all kinds of fantasy and sci-fi and enjoy those. And Arden and I can do, games of make believe. But also, I'm not teaching kids that the make believe is real. And that's where I think the line comes in. I think at being playful with stuff, I think even, having an inside joke that ultimately, hopefully everybody knows isn't the case. Like when the lights come on, oh, look, we're getting a message. It's not like you're gathering everybody in your family together to sit in the living room and say, please, grandma, flick the lights. How are you? Flick once for yes and twice for no, as if you're conducting a seance off of it. Outside of that, there's nothing wrong with having some fun. We all do stuff. And by the way, we all have things that we believe that are almost certainly nonsense, and yet we sincerely believe them. That doesn't mean that it's the best course of action. That's why I say I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. But it may be the case that in a given situation, the truth isn't the best option in any number of ways. And I'm not just talking about, do these pants make my butt look big? I'm saying in a real sense, it may be the case, like when my grandmother was dying, she had sent me a letter basically saying, hey, I understand you don't believe in God, and that's okay because I love you. And we definitely disagreed on stuff. And if my grandma came to me and was like, oh, I just want you to return back to Jesus, return back to the fold before I die. I don't know what I'd do. I don't know if I would lie to her and say that I did so that there's some peace before she dies, or if I would probably, because I know her and I know me and I know how we interacted, I would probably not lie or pretend. I would be like, I know that's what you want, and that's why I love you. And as soon as Jesus loves me as much as you do, maybe I'll come back. I would have, said something, anything, to make it kind of fun.
Yeah, I think a funny but true answer you could use there is something like, I'll do my best. That's really what we do when we try to find the truth of these matters by having these discussions. Because maybe somebody someday will have that evidence.
How I approach some of that stuff is,
one of my prime goals.
If somebody tells me, I think there's an afterlife, I think, well, if you go first, save me a spot. Because was it Christopher Hitchens who said, I rather like surprises, right? If there is something, and if I go first and there is an afterlife, I will find you wherever that is, somewhere in the cosmos, whatever I am, whatever form I take, I will, if I can, I'm going to find you, And Natalie and I have had that conversation as well. She doesn't know what's out there. She thinks we may go on in some form. I've seen no evidence for that, but I've said, honey, if I go first and there's something out there, I'll find you. I will find you. And those types of scenarios, I think they're benign ways, even compassionate ways to try to talk about what for many are hot button issues like eternity, life after death. What's the nature of life? What happens to our, corporeal bodies after we die? I mean, those types of things. I think there's a way to approach it compassionately in most cases. So that's my 2 cents.
I tend to look at it like the lottery discussions. If there is an afterlife, it's a surprise, it's a bonus. I have no reason to think it's going to happen. I'll be the one that's most surprised, but here's what I'd like it to be like, and here's what I'd like to do. And to me, that's just like the lottery discussion. I don't think I'm actually going to win the lottery, but when it's at 600 million and my math skills go out the window and I buy a ticket, there's always, Art and I are going to be driving a couple hours to a reptile expo, and a good 30, 40 minutes of that would be like, oh my gosh, if we won the lottery, what are we, where are we going to put our snake breeding facility? And, what's it going to be like, and all this other stuff. That stuff is fun. And it's not, I don't think it's hurting anybody, but if it is, somebody can point it out and I will change my mind. Brad, I appreciate the question. I got a handful of other callers. We're going to move on now, but
sure.
Yeah,
Can I toss you one last thing before I go?
Harmful. What's that?
Can I toss you one last thing before I go?
Sure.
So quick and simple is a funny way I found too, just for you guys in the future, of dismissing anecdotes is by taking the research methods of validity and reliability rather than the philosophical ones, where validity is how well it measures what it's supposed to measure. Reliability is how consistently it can be reproduced. That's all.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. I just recorded videos yesterday to finish off the month of August, and one of them is on validity and soundness, and another one is on fallacies in general. So when he was talking about validity and reliability, my brain got mired in the notes from yesterday's video, and I was like, wait, you're talking about something else. I was like, that's not right, but then you're talking about something else. Fun stuff. Hey, you want to have a call where somebody thinks they can actually prove that a God exists?
I'm in. Let's do it.
I mean, that's the whole purpose of the show. So Emory,
yes,
in Mississippi, I think it is. You say there are 3 easy ways to prove that God exists. Can we start before the 3? Because I'd like to do them kind of one at a time, and we may not get to all of them. But
that's what I was looking forward to, going one at a time.
But the first question is, what type of God are you going to be demonstrating?
A God that
Emory.
Hey,
Emory.
Sir?
Emory.
Sir?
Do me a favor,
sir.
I need you to back off your phone or microphone, and I need you to lower the volume of your voice because for some reason it's modulating so loudly that it's distorting to the point of almost being unlistenable, and we want to be able to listen to what you're saying. So let's pull that mic away and soften you. All right, let's try again. Here we go.
Okay. Well, what I like to do is show, like, when God says something, like it actually happens, and of course I said there's 3 ways to prove it, and one of the ways to prove it is the transatlantic slave trade is in the Bible, and not only that, there's the 666 prophecy, and third, there's the modern day Gaza and Palestine, an Israel prophecy that's happening right now. That's word for word, and I can even use science to prove some of it. Starting with the first one,
pause for a second, Emory.
Okay.
All right. So the question I asked was, which God are we going to demonstrate? So I'm assuming.
Sorry.
Hang on. Wait until I'm done asking the question. So I'm assuming now that we're going with some version of the God of the Bible.
Right. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said there's 3 ways of demonstrating it, and that it seems to me that you're arguing there are 3 events: the transatlantic slave trade, something about 666, and what's currently going on in Gaza, that those 3 things are in the Bible explicitly.
Yes, sir.
Cool.
In extreme detail.
Let me ask a question in extreme detail. Cool. Let me ask a question before we get to where exactly they are. Let's say that there was a passage in the Bible that says, in around 2,000 years from now, in Israel, there will be strife and struggle and bombing and slaughter. All of that would be accurate, right?
Yeah.
How would the accuracy of that demonstrate that it could only have come from a God rather than some other mechanism of predicting the future?
it's just in extreme detail. It's very precise. How can you tell if somebody's right?
That's not what I asked.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
If the Bible had my phone number in it, that's incredibly accurate and specific. Would that prove that the only way my number could have ended up in the Bible is if there's a God who put it there?
It's no. Well,
if my phone number were in the Bible, would that be proof that the only way that my phone number could be in the Bible is because God put it there?
Oh, it's like,
Emery?
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think
carry
about
on
it.
a conversation here.
Like
I've got the same question.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, it's like when you're breaking stuff down. It's you can even use science into it. As long as it lines up. There's some things that can't be reasoned away with. Like you can
Emery,
you can look up
Emery, this is not remotely an answer to my question. My question is a yes or no question. If my phone if my phone number appeared in the Bible, would that be sufficient to conclude that it must be in the Bible because a God put it there?
No, it's not.
Cool. Now, do you have anything from the Bible that is more specific than my phone number?
Yes.
I'll bet you $1,000 you don't, but go right ahead. Which one do you want? Transatlantic slave trade 666 or Israel Gaza?
Since I want to go with science on this one, I'm going to say the transatlantic slave trade.
Cool.
Emery, step away from your mic or your phone just a few inches.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Okay.
So
I want to go with the transatlantic slave trade.
Hang on. Where in the Bible is the transatlantic slave trade described with more accuracy than my phone number?
Zephaniah 3:10.
Okay. Zephaniah 3 says, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughters of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering." And you say that is the Bible describing the transatlantic slave trade with more detail than my phone number.
Yeah. Well, not that, but it takes a while to get to that point. But I do have multiple sources that can back it up, though, even with science.
Emery,
that's what I'm saying. Yes, sir.
So first of all, science isn't involved here. You have a book, and you say the book is making a claim about the transatlantic slave trade, and that the claim that it makes is there with stop talking. Stop talking. You're saying that the claim is there more accurately than my phone number. And you gave me Zephaniah 3:10, which doesn't say transatlantic, doesn't say slave trade at all. So what else you got?
Okay. Let's see here. There's one of the curses that would be on the children of Israel, and it was in there. It said that let's see. I believe that only the African Americans fit that curse, and and it's lining up with what even Rabbi Harry Rosenberg has said. There's a rabbi named Harry Rosenberg. He's been going around saying Black Americans are the real Jews, the descendants of Israel. And not only has DNA and science proved it, the Bible proves it too, because there's a specific curse that's supposed to be on the children of Israel.
Emory, I hate to let you know, but science does not confirm any of this, and what Rosenberg or anybody else says is irrelevant. You claimed that the Bible has a description of the transatlantic slave trade that is more accurate than my phone number. That appears to not be true.
Well, you could show them the narrative of that question, though. That's what's going on there. I'm trying to break it down to you. And
Emory, I'm having difficulty. Emory, first of all, you've got to stay away from the microphone. If you could listen to this and what it's doing to everybody's ears, you would probably just hang up. But the reality is, you claimed, do you know how accurate a phone number is? Like, let's just say that you have 10 digits. And if one of them is off and you try to call me, are you going to reach me? No. So all 10 digits. Now, given that we have a 10-digit number there for my phone number, the precision of that number is staggering. You have nothing in the Bible.
I see what you mean. Okay.
You have nothing in the Bible that talks about the transatlantic slave trade in any sort of specifics at all. There's nothing about the transatlantic slave trade.
Believe me, it's in there.
There is nothing. Stop interrupting me, Emory. Emory, what the fuck does Duke University have to do with anything?
Science.
Okay. Seth, I'm done. I don't know if you have anything else.
I have nothing. I have.
Duke and Waterstrand University.
Jesus. I think that's the end of the call. I think if we can't follow simple instructions to back away from the mic or the phone, I think we're probably walking uphill anyway. But I heard claims untethered to the scripture in Zephaniah that he was referring to. I heard claims about black people and the Israelites. Of course, anytime you get into the fulfilled prophecy angle anyway, you've got to deal with the failed prophecy. And of course, my favorite one is the prophecy of Tyre. And mostly I thought it was a word salad. I couldn't really follow it. Was I just an idiot, Matt? Or, was there anything cogent in there that you were able to track?
No, there was no argument. There was no structure. And when you mentioned just throw out Duke University, and when I say what does Duke University have to do it, and your answer is science, there's not a cogent thought there. What's happened is that Emory, like many other people, has been convinced by some rather charismatic speakers that if you read certain passages in the Bible a certain way with a certain understanding, all of which comes now and is actually guided, you can find the Bible describing things that occurred much later, except they don't describe it in any detail. There's nothing, if you look at the passage in Zephaniah, it just says, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughters of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. Well, that is not, there's so many different ways that you could interpret that. That does not mean, by the way, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, you realize if there's a river beyond, if there's a north-south river, if you're on the east side, then beyond is west of that. And if you're on the west side, then beyond is east of that. So right off the bat, even being as charitable as possible, saying from beyond the river doesn't tell us anything. Oh, well, the authors we know were east of Ethiopia, so they must have meant west. Okay, cool. Do you realize that once you start going west, you can never stop going west? And when you start going east, you can never stop going east. If you keep walking, you will always be walking east and you'll always be walking west. It's different. If you start going north, you will eventually be headed south. And if you start heading south, you will eventually be headed north. But if you start going east, you always will. Surely, some God who knew about the transatlantic slave trade and knew that it was going to be a problem would have included a passage that said, in about 1700 years, people will come over to this side of the world from another side of the world and kidnap the individuals and take them with them to enslave them in a new nation. The problem is, even if it said that, that's not very specific because slavery was already happening then. And it isn't specific enough. That's why I went with my phone number. If my phone number appeared in the Bible, like clearly, not with some equidistant letter sequence and not just, converting Hebrew letters to their numerical equivalent and saying, somewhere that string of my phone number is there. But like literally, if there was a passage that said, hey, you can call Matt Dillahunty and Seth Andrews at 720-619-2288. That would be impressive. I wouldn't have any idea how an ancient book could have that information. It still would not demonstrate that a God existed, but it would certainly be puzzling. And it would be infinitely more puzzling, or incredibly more puzzling, than a passage from Zephaniah that talks about bringing an offering from the other side of Ethiopia. That's just not specific. Or Duke University is science.
Some of what he was talking about has echoes of, it reminded me of the Black Hebrew Israelites. They are, I'll call them a relatively extremist group. I recently saw them marching on the Washington Capitol steps, and they claim that, African Americans are descendants of the ancient Israelites, and the more extreme factions are really Black nationalists and even Black globalists. There's a lot of really problematic stuff going on, but I heard shades of that when Emery was speaking. Maybe that's an influence on his perspective, but honestly, I don't know what to do with almost everything he said, that which I could hear. So,
yeah. All right, we have other callers here as well, and we always prioritize theist callers here. So Brian from Illinois is calling in, and Brian, before we start, I will make judicious use of the hold button to make sure we're not talking over each other. What Brian wants to do is something that a bunch of people are just going to find absolutely offensive. So just saying at the outset, Brian is calling in to justify slavery in the Bible. So Brian, you're on with Seth and Matt.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So what we need to do, for one thing, is to start to justify slavery. We need to understand what slavery is, correct? So in your mind, what is slavery?
Owning another human being as property.
Okay. So like right off the bat, we have two problems. Like ownership and property are two social constructs, correct? So we need to get to like the basis of what slavery is, correct? So for example, we would have both agree, or all three of us would agree, that slavery is actually the control of another human being.
No, we wouldn't.
What do you mean?
We wouldn't. You asked for my definition of slavery. I gave you my definition of slavery.
I agree, and I'm not denying that. But I'm saying is like property and ownership are both social constructs that are completely meaningless. Like you can't.
No. Social constructs are not meaningless. You know what I mean when I say property, and you know what I mean when I say ownership. There's nothing in this that is remotely
I agree with you, but I'm saying
stop talking over me, because if you break my zen,
you're right.
I'm going to yell at you and hang up on you, and you're going to look stupid, and I'm going to look stupid. We don't need to do that. So slavery is the ownership of another person as property. Period. It doesn't matter if property is a social construct and ownership is a social construct. That's what it is. There are plenty of social constructs.
Okay.
Now, justify owning another person.
But my
as
point
property.
being is like we can both agree that like it's controlling another human being, right?
No, it's not.
It isn't.
It is a form of control, but there are other forms of control that aren't slavery. Why are you so desperate to? You asked me to define.
No,
slavery.
don't worry.
Shut up.
Yeah, no, we're all good.
Shut
Sorry,
up.
I'm not trying to be rude.
Shut up. You asked me to define slavery. I defined it. Now you're trying to change the definition so that you can spin it in a different way. If you're going to justify what the Bible says about slavery, you can try to do that. But the Bible says that you can own someone as property. That is what I objected to. Are you going to justify that?
Yes.
Cool.
So the reason that I'm bringing it down to where it's at is there's three phases, if we could say. So the first phase is extra biblical, non-biblical, and then I'll get to biblical, I promise you. But
No.
you would agree that...
Okay, so I'm going to mute you, and I'm going to explain this to you very simply so that I can maintain my zen. No, we are not going to spend time with you going down extra biblical stuff in the hopes that eventually you get to the biblical thing. You called in and said you want to justify slavery in the Bible. You asked what the definition of slavery was. I gave it to you. My definition is consistent with what the Bible advocates. The Bible advocates buying slaves from the heathen that surround you. It advocates that slaves become your property. It has different rules for Hebrew slaves than for non-Hebrew slaves. And that here's what you can do to trick your Jewish slaves, your Hebrew slaves, into becoming slaves forever. But it specifically says that these people are your money, your property, that you can pass on to your children. You don't have to do anything at all. But if you're going to call in to say you want to justify slavery in the Bible, you need to justify that. So stop wasting time, stop trying to redefine things, and give the justification for why you think it's permissible to own people as property the way the Bible says. Begin.
Okay. Well, it's kind of bad faith because I was just trying to start.
Okay, I'm going to mute you again because every time we try to do this, you do something like, well, it's kind of bad faith. No, I'm not the one arguing in bad faith, Brian. You are. You called in to say you wanted to justify slavery in the Bible. You asked for my definition. I gave it. I've now given you 2 opportunities. And every time I give you an opportunity, you want to whine. So I'm going to unmute you again. Don't whine. Don't say it's unfair. Just do what you said you can do. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, and justify slavery in the Bible. Begin.
Okay, I will. I'm just saying. So I'll go.
Okay, I'm going to mute you again. Don't do the I will, just do it. I don't need any preamble. All you need to do when I unmute you is say, here's why the Bible is correct to justify and permit owning people as property, and then give the justification. Hopefully that's clear.
All right, no problem. So if you have a group of people that are doing absolutely horrible things and they have a horrible culture, whereas, for example, they're committing child sacrifice, they're having incestual relationships, there's a bunch of other things that we can go into, but I won't. If there was a higher being, a higher consciousness, you would want to stop that. So therefore, the only way that you could stop that is to conquer a people and to control what they are doing and stop them from doing the terrible things. Now, because you'd want to stop them and control them from what they're doing, it might take a few generations for you to get that ideology out of their head. So therefore, you would have to enslave them and control them for generations. So therefore, there's actually a ton.
Does the Bible only support slavery? Does the Bible only support enslaving bad people?
Yes.
No, it doesn't.
For example,
no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't, Brian. I'm going to mute you again so that we don't have to talk over each other. The Bible has different rules for Hebrew slaves and for non-Hebrew slaves. And it says specifically to buy your slaves from the heathen that surround you. But that does not in any way say only buy people who are engaged in child sacrifice or incest. Basically, what you seem to be arguing is that all of those other people were immoral because they worshiped the wrong God, And that's what made it justified to enslave them, to save them from their false beliefs. Is that your line?
Yeah, absolutely. So if
Cool.
you look
I
at the
completely
Canaanite
disagree.
history,
I completely disagree. And I find that beyond absurd, because a group of people who have a different belief system is something that we currently permit and encourage. And we understand that not everybody who's a Muslim, not everybody who's a Christian, not everybody who's a Hindu is necessarily good or necessarily bad. It would be grossly immoral for us, let's say for you Christians right now, to start enslaving non-Christians, correct?
absolutely, I disagree with you, and I think I've
You think it would
seen
be, you think it would be
you.
morally permissible? You would think it would be morally permissible right now for Christians to enslave non-Christians,
Yeah, sure. And I actually
including Jews,
think that you would
including
agree
Jews,
with me because
including Jews,
excuse me,
including
can I
Jews.
just have a moment?
No, you
Can I
can't,
have a
because
moment?
this is my show and I'm asking specific questions to expose your absolute ridiculous absurdity. So when you say that it was moral for Christians to own non-Christians as slave, does that mean Jews too?
No,
No,
but
it doesn't. Why not?
no, but hold.
Why not?
I'll explain.
Why not?
Can I explain? Can I explain?
You know what
Like
an explanation,
you're being very,
you know what an explanation
look,
starts
Matt.
with? You know, here you go, Brian, let me mute you. An explanation doesn't start with, can I explain? It starts with, here's my explanation. And so when I unmute you, you can give me your explanation for why it's okay to enslave everybody except Jews. Go ahead.
I actually never said everybody, but
I'm
know.
sorry.
I'm
I'm sorry. Let me mute you again, because what you said was that it was morally permissible for Christians to enslave non-Christians. That is set theory. Christians are the set, and non-Christians is everything outside of that set. So I picked a separate group outside of the set of Christians, Jews, specifically to say, is there an exception for them? And you created an exception there. So you haven't made a list of who you can and can't enslave. You started with Christians can enslave all non-Christians. And then when I pointed out a group of people in the non-Christian category that you might object to, you did. And then you somehow want to suggest that it's wrong for me to assume that you meant everybody except the Jews and the Christians. Well, if that's not the case, then instead of saying it's okay for Christians to enslave non-Christians, you should have said it's okay for Christians to enslave this group and this group and this group. So do you have a list of religious groups? Do you have a list of religious groups that it's okay for Christians to enslave?
Yes, Islam. And you would agree. And I heard
No,
you
I don't
actually agree.
Okay. No, see, here's the thing. I'm going to mute you again, Brian. Don't tell me I agree with you. You're going to look incredibly foolish. I do not agree with you. I am opposed to all slavery. I do not agree that it is morally permissible to own human beings as property. And no, I do not think that it is morally permissible for Christians to own Muslims. And so instead of you calling in to say that I agree with you, I'm telling you right now, I do not agree with you. Instead of pretending that you know my brain, why don't you just defend your position and I'll tell you why I don't agree or why I do.
That's fine. Can I talk? So I seen
No,
you.
actually, you can't, Brian. So I'm going to mute you again. We're going to teach you this. You're muted because I didn't want us talking over each other and would like to make a point. When I unmute you and you're like, "Can I talk?" You sound like a whiny little bitch, and it's really annoying. It really is, because it makes it seem like you think we're doing something wrong by trying to make sure that the conversation proceeds in a reasonable fashion. I'll try it again. When I unmute you and ask you a question, that's when you can talk. So why do you think that I'm in favor of Christians enslaving Muslims?
Because you'd want them to stop having sex with 9-year-olds.
So Brian, I agree with you that I would like for Muslims to stop. You didn't let me finish. You just took the agreement.
You're all good. Go ahead.
I agree with you that I would like for Muslims to stop advocating for child rape, But that doesn't mean that I think it's okay for Christians to enslave them. So no, I don't agree with you.
Yeah, well, so I would agree with you in modern times, in modernity, that enslavement is not okay.
But that's not what you said.
We're talking about, no,
Nope, I'm going to mute you again. Seth.
Well, I'd like to give, honestly, I'd like to give him a little more oxygen, even if it's a bad idea, even if he's starting with one falsity and leading into a second one. I'd like to hear a little bit more, if that would be okay.
Go for it.
I appreciate that. So my point being is like in modernity, we can control people in different ways because we have a lot more population and we have systems and bureaucracies where we could stop people. But in ancient times, we didn't have the bureaucracy. We don't have the control abilities that we do at this moment. So we would want to stop. I'm not going to use the term that you used, Matt, but I think we can all agree. We can all agree that, you know, we would do whatever we could to stop that garbage. And my point being is in what I called in, and I said I can justify slavery in ancient times. So I understand that, like, what I said, but like you keep cutting me off, so like I have to give precise answers to what you're saying is also, for example, in the Islamic world, Islam is a declaration of war against the world. Not only Christians or Jews or like if you guys, I totally respect you guys. I really do. I love listening to your show. I enjoy it. It's fun. I get my own ideas, but if you were like a Christian in a Christian population and you had the Islamic Caliphate next to you wanting to attack you, you would do everything you could to stop them, and you'd want to like control them. And
okay,
you'd want to take them over.
I would like to jump in, if I may.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I love this.
Islam today is the Christianity of the 11th century. If you look at their scriptures, there's not all that much that is different.
Oh, there's huge difference. Don't do that.
Hang on. Hold on.
No, that's fine. We can have a discussion about that, but go ahead.
There are
I'm sorry.
Huge differences in how they are carried out in practice. Fundamental Islam, I'll say it that way. But to say Islam is any one thing, or Muslims are any one thing, or the adherents of the world's second most popular religion, 1.5 billion people all want the same thing. The truth is that the vast majority of Muslims are actually peacekeeping, peace-loving Muslims, and the vast majority of the people who are being persecuted, oppressed, and murdered by radical Islamists are themselves Muslims. So to watch you speak in these wild, overly broad accusations about an entire demographic, I mean, have you interviewed them all? Have you done your peer review? Of course not. These are very unhelpful and I think extremely harmful overgeneralizations about a people group that are as individual as those who make it up. Secondly, I have a problem with this idea that God could not immediately jump in to any societal construct to correct the slavery problem because we would need generations of acclimation, kind of a moral warming to temperature. I think that's crazy. An omnipotent deity would be able to come down, and first of all, he would have put together a model that didn't require or allow for the ownership of other human beings. Secondly, if something like that did take place, an omnipotent God would already know the model, how to immediately solve the problem in the moment and correct it from that moment forward. This idea that it would require generations because God had to condescend to primitive man, I find ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I just to clarify, I actually grew up in a neighborhood that was, I wouldn't say a majority, but at the time was like very heavily. I actually love my Muslim brothers. So many of them are great people. I have no problem with Muslims at all. I actually interact with them all the time. I love Muslim people.
Well, this sounds like a switching of gears, man. You were going hard at Muslims a minute ago.
No, I never once said in Muslims. I said Islam.
Islam.
Surah 9 Surah 9 in the Quran is a declaration of war against the world. And
Islam
I know
actually,
that Matt knows that.
hang on. Islam itself translates submission. It does not.
No,
Islam itself is not a declaration of war against the world.
You know, I'm sorry. So I'll correct you on a few things. I know this stuff because, like I said, I grew up with Muslims. I know it. Actually, people always say that like Islam or Muslim means submission. It actually means surrender. It means like submitting
so
under
your
force.
definition then is more accurate because you grew up around Muslims. Is that what I'm to understand?
Yeah, I mean, like
Am I
that. No
inferring
Arabic
that
and told me what
correctly?
Arabic is.
Okay,
Yeah,
so a
so
Muslim told you that it doesn't mean submission.
Yeah, so like I'm sorry, like we speak English, so like I take the word of someone that speaks Arabic, not you.
I see. Okay. So those of us who have done a lot of forgive me, go ahead,
submission
Matt.
and surrender is what Islam means. It means submission and surrender. Those are both the same word meaning translation.
Period. No, that's incorrect because like
no, it's correct.
I'm sorry if I no,
no,
you
it's
can,
correct.
You can, no.
It's correct.
No, because submit.
It's correct. You can Google it. It's correct. You can Google it.
No, that's fine. But like, we need to understand what the difference is.
It's absolutely correct.
I don't care about Google. No, because
the sit here and keep saying no, it's not correct. Would you like me to pull up a fucking screen of Google describing it? And would you like me to get some Arabic speaking callers to call in to point out that Islam means surrender and Islam means submission, and that these see, this is the thing. You're an English speaker getting your information second and third hand and willing to pronounce that everybody who disagrees with your narrow understanding, you child, is wrong.
You call me a child, but like I actually don't get it secondhand. I get it from an actual Arabic speaker.
Hey, Brian,
there's a difference.
Brian, what does secondhand mean?
It means like you get it from somebody that says something, and actually what I'm getting it for somebody that speaks Arabic, which means it's firsthand. And what it means is surrender.
That is secondhand. Firsthand is if you speak Arabic. Secondhand is if you're getting it from somebody else that speaks Arabic. You don't even know what secondhand means, and that's in English. Whatever. Congratulations. I will shut up now and let you continue with Seth. But when you don't understand the basics,
you want to swear and be stupid, it's fine. I'm just telling you.
Look, let me just mute you so that I can finish my thought. I'll let Seth continue. My apologies, but you don't understand the English, the very English you're talking about, and you don't understand the difference between the concept of firsthand and secondhand. And that it disqualifies you from further conversation with me.
You know, I'm reminded of.
So you said I got it secondhand. I'm getting it firsthand from an Arabic speaker, which means he speaks Arabic. You're getting it.
I'm going to mute you because when I unmute you, you can talk to Seth about anything you want. But if all you're going to do is try to claim that I'm wrong about what secondhand means again, I will mute you repeatedly. If you just keep asserting that you somehow understand English better than me, or the dictionary entry that I'm looking at, or the Wikipedia entry that I'm looking at on what secondhand means to verify that I'm not losing my mind, what is first? Do you understand in English there's first person and second person? Just talk to Seth. Don't bother trying to correct me.
I'm not sure. There's a lot of mileage left to be had. What he's giving us is, I know a guy. I mean, that is essentially what he's basing his position on. And you and I have done a lot of interacting and a lot of storytelling with and ex-Muslims and exposing the harm that Islam does, which means while it's not our first language, right, because we came out of Christianity, we have certainly been in that sandbox quite a bit, and we have stood on the shoulders of those who are ex-Muslims, who can talk about what it is, what it does, who it affects and why, and what the definition of Islam truly is. And so Emery's, well, I know a guy who told me, and therefore it's absolutely true, plus these broad statements about Islam and conquest. You want to talk conquest? Fine. Islam today is the fundamental Christianity of the 11th century, which was about crusade and conquest and, putting people on the rack until they renounced and accepted God. We see the spread of Christianity throughout the world so often at the end of a sword by threats and, under pain of death. And Islam in that way, the Fundi Islam, has not had its enlightenment yet. But to say that Islam is all about conquering the world tells me that you really don't know Muslim. You haven't met Muslim families. You don't see how Muslims, in so many cases, have mitigated their faith and walked away from the fundamentals, may not even be aware of what's in their Quran. Theirs is a cultural, community faith untethered to the hateful, misogynistic, and murderous verses in the Quran. And to say that Islam or Muslim is any one thing, to me, is extremely problematic. I'm going to leave you with one final thought as he remains on mute, if that's okay, Matt, because I don't want to talk to him anymore.
Oh, I don't have him on mute.
Oh.
I've been respectful. I'm listening. I'd like to have a discussion. You know what I mean?
I appreciate the respect. If we go into the book of Deuteronomy, there's a scenario where God allows one of his soldiers to take as a sex slave a kidnapped woman. Verse 10 says, when you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home and have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she's lived in your house and mourned her father and mother, which the soldier just killed, by the way, for a full month, you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. If you're not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. He's kidnapping the woman whose family he just killed. He's altering her appearance, and he can keep her as his possession unless he decides he doesn't like her anymore, and then he releases her like a stray cat. Now tell me how this fits into your model where God had to condescend to a society and warm them up to the idea of being more egalitarian and humanitarian.
I never said that. I don't believe in egalitarianism, so that's a whole nother subject.
You don't believe in equality? You don't believe in equality and equity among human beings?
No.
All the human brothers and sisters on this planet, you're not interested?
No, not at all.
Let me ask you this then. Who would you subjugate? Who should be superior and who should be inferior in your opinion?
Well, that's a false dichotomy, like inferior, superior. That's a false dichotomy. But
no, if someone is
unequal
or unequal, then one would be inferior or superior. There would be a class system, a hierarchy.
No, you're saying. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, so like I believe in hierarchy. I don't believe in egalitarianism, but that doesn't mean that people are equal in the sight of God, and as human beings we're equal. So egalitarian is a little different than equality, and like you guys will like try to destroy me over that, but I think there's a hierarchy to life. I see that all over the place. Like I have a boss that's above me. I respect him and I submit to him.
I'm good. Hey,
I mean,
unless you had something else, I can't
thesaurus
think
entry for submit, and the second thing there is surrender. So
I just don't have anything. I don't get it. I always like to lean on the book, and it's not just because I narrated the audiobook by Dr. Joshua Bowen, the Assyriologist. Did the Old Testament endorse slavery? It did. And while the apologists sometimes, at least Emery was like, well, it was true slavery, but we had to have it. There are some apologists who say, no, it was only debt slavery or indentured servitude. And occasionally it was, but there was also chattel slavery where people were property. And if the slave had a spouse, that spouse then became property. And if the slaves had children, those children would become generational property passed down under the authority and rulership of the masters. They could be bought and sold like objects. So this idea that all of this is somehow moral or God had to, how does an omnipotent God fall to any requirement? Why would God be required or have to do it any way whatsoever? That God could actually make the rules or make a miracle happen, or just set the tone immediately without having to jump through all of these generational hoops. I find it's really offensive when you think about it in those terms. So
I think you got to, you got the most important question answered, which is that he's not for equality, which shouldn't be surprising at all for someone who's calling in to justify owning slaves. And his entire line of why it's okay to own slaves is these people follow another god. These people are morally bankrupt. They're a threat to all of us. He has this cartoon version of Islam and then expands that. So evidently, when he said it was okay for Christians to own non-Christians, he didn't mean every non-Christian, and he didn't mean Jews, but he meant Muslims. And thought and tried to claim that I was going to agree with him, and that while I am here standing up in opposition to Islam on a regular basis, both with its tenets and its actions, it's weird to want to do this. Well, Islam doesn't mean submission, it means surrender, when they're synonyms, and what it means in Arabic is submission to the will of God, surrender to the will of God. But he wanted to make it as if, oh, it means surrender and it's an open declaration of war on everybody else, so they are the enemy and therefore it's okay to enslave them. Except that it's not okay to enslave your enemies. We have rules about war. Wars, it's ridiculous that we have rules about war, but imagine how much worse it would be if we didn't have rules about war and how much worse it was. But you don't just get to imprison people and make them your slaves. There are certain rules about how you must treat prisoners of war. Even if there was an open war between a Christian conglomerate and a Muslim nation, you don't get to keep them as slaves and make them prisoners of war. And then he was like, well, I agree that that's not the way to do it now, but they didn't have options of diplomacy back in the old days. Okay, but the Bible doesn't say, hey, go therefore and collect the Muslims, because Islam didn't freaking exist. Islam wasn't a thing when this was written. It's just...
I think, was I off base? Check me on this when I say that a non-egalitarian system does have superiors and inferiors. Wouldn't
Yes.
it? Just by definition, you would have those setting the tone, those who had more privilege, those who controlled, set the rules, enforced whatever codes. I just feel like a non-equal society does have those who are considered less than. I don't think that was an overreach. I think he thought so.
No. Egalitarianism is the notion that people should be equal and have equal rights and opportunities. And if you're opposed to that, then you are necessarily opposed to equal opportunity, equal rights, and equal status. And so you must have, as soon as you say we're not all equal, you're saying, some people are better and worse than each other. Now we can talk about what the category is. Like, is the category beauty? Is it intelligence? Is it strength? Is it, but if we're talking about as human beings, then those little facets of difference between us are the things that we specifically throw out. Secular humanism is based on egalitarian notions that no matter how smart you are or how dumb you are, how pretty you are or how ugly you are, how physically fit you are or how physically decrepit you are, you deserve equal rights, equal opportunity, equal dignity. And to suggest that you're opposed to that implies strongly that you think there are some people who are preferable to others based on some criteria.
Well, I wasn't trying to digress too much with Deuteronomy 21, but what I was trying to show is that if God was constrained by a system that he did not want, why would God then give specific instructions about a type of sexual slavery? Grabbing the woman, altering her appearance, and then deciding if she was going to work out, and then releasing her if not. This is not something where God looked down and thought, oh, crap, how did that happen? What am I going to do now? This is an instance of God looking down and saying, I am creating the model. for kidnapping, enslavement, and subjugation. And there are examples of that throughout Scripture. So I just don't buy this idea that God looked and said, he was kind of surprised and said, oh, crap. Well, the things haven't worked out here. I guess I'm going to have to play a long game to get people out of this slavery business. It was God himself in so many cases, according to Scripture, who dictated the model for slavery.
Yeah, it's I mean, if you look at the Bible addresses slavery in a number of different places, famously in Exodus 21, but Leviticus 25, verses 44 through 46 is where we get the notion that it says, as for your male and female slaves, whom you may have. So that line itself, as the may have, is the permission to own people. You can buy your male and female slaves from the nations that are around you. You may also buy from the strangers who sojourn with you and the clans that are with you, who have been born in your land, and that they may be your property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you to inherit, not your daughters, because they don't get property. You may bequeath them to your sons after you. You may make slaves of them, but over your brothers, the people of Israel, you shall not rule one over another ruthlessly. And yet, in spite of that, there's a separate set of rules for Hebrew slaves. I just don't get it. It's one of the things that we've obviously learned how to be better. That, and this is why from the very start, he wanted a definition of slavery that wasn't owning people's property. He wanted a definition that was controlling people so that he could equate it with a justified imprisonment or a justified punishment, or let's lock these people away so that they stop harming others. And that's why he wanted to spin this as it's about control. Because if you view, instead of, hey, I'm going to buy workers that are my property that I can pass on to my kids, and I can beat them as long as they don't die within a couple of days. If you view those passages about slavery, it's very difficult to justify that. But if you redefine slavery so that it is control, and you redefine Islam so that it is a declaration of war on everyone else, then all of a sudden you have a rational justification to control the terrible Muslims that are coming after you. And that is the biblical justification of slavery. It's absolutely embarrassing, the number of hoops and how much it's like we're playing right hand red Twister. It's like watching him play Twister of like, yes, but boom, right hand green. Islam actually means it's a declaration of war. What difference does it make what Islam means? Because it doesn't make any difference what Christianity means. It doesn't make any difference if there's something about the word or the label. If Islam meant submission and everything in the Quran was good, would anybody care that it meant submission? Maybe it just means submission to the good ideas. It's the fact that the things in the Quran are objectionable. And he's like, you'd agree with me because you don't want them to justify trying to have sex with 9-year-olds. Correct. I do not want them to have sex with 9-year-olds, and I do not want them to try to justify it. I think that anybody who does so should definitely be investigated. But that doesn't mean that I think they should be enslaved.
I have nothing to add.
We have a couple more calls left. We're going to do something fun here. Michael from Michigan's calling. I think it's Michigan. Pronouns are he, him. Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, Michael, you want to talk about child sacrifice?
Yeah. I listening to the hang up you did the other night with Will Judy, and I think a caller called in and was talking about or asked you if if Bible commands or God commands in the Bible for the Israelites to do human sacrifices, and I'm convinced that it does. So I guess I just wanted to flesh that out a little bit with you.
Okay. Where does the Bible say human sacrifice is okay?
Well, you did touch on the Exodus 22 verse. Where that probably everybody runs to. It says, you shall not hold back the offering from your harvest of your wine, the firstborn of your sons, you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother for 7 days, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. So to me, I know you tried to, and I've heard this from apologists as well, say that that's a dedication for priesthood, but I just don't see that as happening through, or
why does it matter what you don't see? Why does it matter what you don't see happening? Were you there? Do you have some special information that others don't?
No, I just think it's overlooked in the same way that we bring up slavery to combat how that the Bible describes a good God. That this is also a good path to go down to make the same point. And then where that also falls apart too is in Ezekiel 20. This whole passage is describing how Israel fell away from Yahweh and went through different gods and things like that. And then Ezekiel 20 verse 25 says, I also gave them statutes that were not good and ordinances by which they could not live. And I pronounced them unclean because of their gifts they made. And they made all their firstborn pass through the fire so that I might make them desolate in order that they might know that I am the Lord. So that's kind of admitting.
I don't hear anything in there about child sacrifice.
When it says, I pronounce them unclean because of their gifts and that they made all their firstborn pass through the fire. And that pass through the fire is common language for denoting child sacrifice. And there are also resources that, like Dan McClellan also purports this view, and that Moloch was actually a creation because it's not found in other Canaanite descriptions of their pantheon. So when they say, like, you sacrifice your gods to Moloch, that was an invention to cover up the fact that it was actually a sacrifice to Yahweh.
Okay.
So just thought maybe, look into that a little more and see if you have your mind changed on that little aspect.
Nope.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's all I want to call in for.
Thanks, Michael.
Seth, welcome. Do you think it calls for child sacrifice?
I don't know how to answer that beyond, I know Yahweh accepts child sacrifice. And this brings me back to the story of Jephthah. It's in Judges. I forget the chapter. Jephthah, the great general, asked Yahweh for victory in battle and said, I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of the door of my house if you will give me victory. Yep. And Yahweh's like, cool. Jephthah goes out, kicks everybody's ass. He comes home, and I don't know what he expected to come out the door of his house. What, a cat, a pig or something? Oh, shit, there's my daughter, my only daughter. And apologists like to skate on this when they say, well, he wasn't upset and she wasn't sacrificed on the altar. She was merely consecrated to God, like a nun, like she would commit the rest of her life to God. And that's why she decided, she asked for, don't kill me right away, but let me go out into the wilderness to mourn the fact that I will die a virgin. And that part of the story makes the apologists say, well, it's because she knew she would be like a nun consecrated to God, and she wanted to grieve that, which is kind of fucked up. And then she came back. Well, if you read the story, you actually see Jephthah seeing his daughter walk through the door, and he's terrified. He's like, oh my God, what have I done? He tears his clothing. He's absolutely horrified because he realized what he is now on the hook to do. And his daughter leaves for 8 weeks, comes back and agrees to be burned on the altar. And Yahweh accepts this altar of flesh, the daughter of Jephthah. So whether or not God commanded child sacrifice outright, I can't recall a verse off the top of my head. But more importantly, I do know that if you believe the Bible, God readily and gladly accepted a child sacrifice. And that's all I really need to know.
Yeah. When you go through this, So, for example, I've talked about the Abraham Isaac thing before, where there's no point in God testing somebody for God to learn something. The only point in testing someone is for the tested to learn something, or for somebody else to learn something. And if God didn't accept child sacrifice, and if God couldn't demand or expect child sacrifice, then if God went to Abraham and said, "Take your firstborn son and make of him a burnt offering," if that wasn't consistent with God's character and Abraham went to do it, then God shouldn't reward Abraham for doing it. He should, you know, chastise him. And the only right answer for Abraham, if God is opposed to child sacrifice, the only correct answer from Abraham is, "Hey, I don't know who you are, but you can't be God, because there's no way God would ask me to kill my child. That's not the God. My God is opposed to child sacrifice." And that's the only right answer that Abraham could advocate for. And so you could look at that story and say, therefore the Bible is okay with child sacrifice. You can look at the Jephthah story and say, all right, the Jephthah story doesn't make a lot of sense because, like you were saying, what does he expect to come out of the house? But when you read that actual passage, this isn't, you have to look at it in the context of, this isn't a story about what is or isn't permissible. It's a cautionary tale. It's something that never really happened, and it exists specifically, or I can't say it never happened. We have no reason to think that it happened, but the story seems to exist specifically to justify some Hebrew traditions, because basically he lets her go for 2 months to go weep for her virginity in the mountains. And then when she comes back, she dies a virgin. And the moral of the story, as it has traditionally been portrayed, is be careful what you promise to God, because vows to God are incredibly important. They should not be violated. They cannot be violated. If you make a promise to God, you better keep it. That's the moral of the story. I think, whether we look at the story and say, oh, she wasn't actually offered as a burnt offering. Well, I don't know why not, because that's what he said he'd do. And nowhere does it offer the spin that the apologists do, that, oh, well, she was consecrated, she became like a nun, etc. That's not what the story says. So you're having to add something to that. The problem, though, is this is an event that we don't have any good reason to think that it happened. It's there to tell a cautionary story. And the Bible, in a number of other passages, is explicitly opposed to human sacrifice and child sacrifice. And so the best we can say is God's position is seemingly unclear, but he seems to have rewarded, like God had to know that it was Jephthah's daughter that was going to come out of the house. And if God didn't know it was Jephthah's daughter to come out of the house, then God shouldn't have made the deal either. I mean, it's like Jephthah makes this promise, God delivers on his promise, and then boom, they're both, ooh. But Jephthah may be surprised, although what was he expecting? A chicken to come out and greet him first, or a lamb to greet him first? This reads as a fable, and not in the same as I'm making a sacrifice to a God. It's like the focus is different. And so when you read the passages in Ezekiel and elsewhere that might be used to say, ooh, it seems like there are these stories where the God is accepting child sacrifice. I agree. I've never thought any different. My issue is, does the Bible advocate child sacrifice? The fact that something happened, for example, Lot supposedly slept with his daughters, but that's not the Bible advocating for incest. That is a cautionary tale. And it is how the other tribes of Israel end up being mocked. At no point is the story of Lot and his daughters presented as, here's a good thing. This is what is morally permissible. Get your dad drunk and have sex with him.
Yeah, but can we infer that there was a disproportionate scale for morality? Again, Lot was never punished for what his daughters did, and his daughters weren't punished as well, but Lot's wife was killed for the heinous crime of looking over her shoulder. So if we look at that from the macro lens, it looks like God's priorities are kind of off. Lot was still
Yeah.
more moral than his wife in the eyes of Yahweh.
Yeah. It's
I'm interested in Isaac coming down off the mountain. Like, Abraham was so committed that he had to have his hand stayed by the angel because he was going to drive that dagger into the heart of Isaac or whatever. And the angel's like, psych, God just wanted to see if you were going to go through with it. Okay, untie the kid and let's go down and, let's get some Haagen-Dazs. And so they're walking down the mountain. And I'm like, what the hell is Isaac thinking? He's like, my dad just tried to how much therapy did the child end up with? And somebody in the chat said something about Jephthah's daughter is like, you know what? If she knew she had 8 weeks, I would do the same. If I knew I had 8 weeks, I would be having as much sex as possible before I was, and maybe on the 59th day, my ass would be on a camel and I would just be going the other direction. Psych, I'm out of here. I'm not doing it. And we should rewrite the Bible with happier endings. I think that would be a more entertaining and moral version. Sure.
Yeah. Somebody in chat also asked about the passage in Leviticus where it says, and you shall eat the flesh of your sons.
Yeah.
That's not in any way a verse advocating child sacrifice. That is a verse where God is describing a punishment. And whether it's figurative or literal, it's not child sacrifice. It is like, I'm going to take everything you have to where you will be forced. If you want to eat, you're going to have to eat your kids. That's more in line with what Leviticus 26 is saying. But it's entirely possible to read through and pick particular verses and say, it doesn't seem to be so strongly opposed to child sacrifice, but that's not the same thing as saying it advocates for child sacrifice. In the Jephthah sense, it's a cautionary tale. In the Leviticus 26 thing, it's I'm going to punish you so much that you'll only have your kids to eat. There's a number of other. I think the Abraham Isaac one is the one that is most telling, because Abraham is rewarded for thinking that God would want him to kill his son. And if you're a God that's opposed to child sacrifice, you don't send that message. Like, if you're a parent and you see one of your kids tell the other kid, Mom wants you to go out and pour gasoline all over the backyard, and you've been raised to know how much your mom prizes the beauty of the lawn and has warned you before, maintain the lawn. The only right answer as a test is to say, Mom would never ask me to pour gasoline on the yard. And if you went out and you poured gasoline on the yard and your mom walked out, and just as you were getting ready to dump that thing of gasoline all over the yard, she had somebody stay your hand and then rewarded you for trying to dump gasoline on the yard, your mom would be sending the wrong message. So the only way to look at the Bible is that God is in fact sending this message that, yes, in fact, I would be willing to accept a child sacrifice, but it just doesn't express that. That's an inference, which I think is justified.
Not to drag it on too long, but I did a thought experiment with some believers years ago. And I devout Christians. And I said, if God came to you the way he came to Abraham and ordered you to execute, I didn't use the word execute, to sacrifice one of your children, pick one, would you do it? And they were aghast. Oh, I would never do it. God would never ask us to do that today. I mean, the rationalizations began. But the more alarming thing, I received 2 responses that said, if God appeared and asked me to do it, I would. And it just gave me the chills. I just, to the bone, thought, this is why we should believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and why these types of fundy mythologies have to be done away with, because they really do. They strip people of anything resembling a healthy moral center. They begin to live in this very destructive alternate reality. To even think of doing such a thing is, it's unthinkable. I don't know. I just had that thought.
Yeah, it is. It's one of those things. we talk about, oh, what does Islam mean, as if it matters. But we're talking about, is the Bible okay with child sacrifice? Well, you can easily pick passages that make it seem like the Bible, and by the transitive property for believers, God is okay with child sacrifice. Those are, you have to read a little bit into it, like we talked about with Abraham and everything else. But then there's other passages that are pretty explicit, like Deuteronomy 18:10. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering. That's explicit. At best, we can say the Bible seems to contradict itself in what is permissible and an inferred view. But yeah, in Deuteronomy, there shall be no one found among you who burns his son or daughter as an offering, or practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens or that. Then there's a weird one in Leviticus that is specifically telling them, you shall not give any of your children to offer them to Moloch. And so I haven't seen Dan's video that the caller was talking about, but that seems to be just a prohibition against sacrificing them to some other god. Because it's like, you shall not give any of your children to offer them to Moloch and profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. And then there's a number of examples where somebody sacrifices their kid, both, the Jephthah thing. I think it's reasonable to look at the story and say, yeah, the story's implication is that he offered her up as a burnt offering, which puts him in conflict with the passage in Deuteronomy and elsewhere. And when you have, I've described it more like board game rules on occasion. When you have a new rule, the newer rules supplant older rules, and specific rules supplant general rules. So you could have a general rule that says, don't sacrifice your children. And then you could have a specific rule that says, don't sacrifice your children to Moloch. And now the specific rule overrides the kind of general thing. The Bible is a collection of a bunch of books written over a long period of time by a lot of people. And the notion that it is a coherent, cohesive, unified message is bizarrely wrong. It would be miraculous if, in fact, it were the case. But it's not surprising to me that the authors of different parts of the book, written at different times, have different takes on slavery or sacrifice. And I don't know. So
you brought up board games. Can I just take a total left turn real quick?
Sure.
Because I tried to learn. I know you're a gamer. I tried to learn. Natalie bought something called Catan.
I've got it.
Is it Catan? Am I saying it right? Catan?
Yeah,
I can't figure the damn thing out. How does someone? I'm a visual learner, so if I'm reading the rules, I can't process it. My brain is not, So how does someone like me learn how to play Catan? Is there a YouTube series that I can watch?
Yes. There are several YouTube series. One of my favorites, you can just go to YouTube. I think you just look up how to play Catan, and there will be a
how to play, because I just felt stupid.
So there's a channel. There's a channel that's actually called, I think, How to Play. But yeah, I've already found like 5 videos. Here's one in 4 minutes from Rules Girl. The Rules Girl puts out these videos is pretty quick and easy. Some of them you're going to have to play. I will say that I loved Settlers of Catan when it first came out, and then I grew to hate it to the point where, yes, I still have copies of it, but I don't play it because I despise Kingmaker games. And for those who don't know, a Kingmaker game, let's imagine that me and Seth and Natalie are playing Catan. And I could be playing with optimal strategy and making the best moves to where it's obvious that I'm going to win the game. But the two of them can conspire together to make sure that I lose. And so instead of caring about each of them trying to win, they join together to as long as one of us wins and he loses, that's fine. And so in games like Catan, where you're making deals, like, hey, I'll give you 2 sheep for wood type of thing. You can decline those deals, or you can make deals with your secret partner across the table that are better than the deals you're doing for other people. I don't like playing those games. They end up being a mess. I want to play a game where you're rewarded for how you actually play, not just, I can flip the board over.
Now, I'm sorry to interject that. That's where my mind went when I heard board games. I was like, hey, Matt would know. So I've asked the question. Thank you for
I will say, if you guys like abstract strategy games for 2 people, no, okay. No. Then I will. For those who do, look up Santorium. But
Sanatorium or
Santorini?
Santorini. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Santorini. It's a really good 2-player abstract strategy game.
I mean, is it one of those so esoteric type things that you're just lost in the weeds? I mean, is it like, is there a game philosophy and a game world you have to memorize? I get overwhelmed. I'm a guy weaned on Yahtzee, for God's sake. So
Santorini is really easy to learn.
Okay.
You can learn it in about 2 minutes, and you can play it for a gazillion years.
And easy to learn, hard to master kind of thing then.
Yeah, but also, I mean, Arn and I, anyway, let's set aside the board game stuff for now.
I'm sorry. That is my fault. I have
a massive collection downstairs. And
my fault.
I mean, if you ask me about board games or snakes, you're going to derail.
Okay, my fault.
All right.
My fault.
Nadine is on the line from Georgia. Oh my gosh.
Hey, babies. How are my babies doing?
We're good. You said you were in the hospital.
I probably not, Seth. We had so much fun last time. Yes. After that, I was starting to feel weak and blah blah blah. And all of a sudden, my son came because I told you he's a musician. He was in the Mediterranean, and he came back. And when he saw me, he said, "Mom, have you seen your eyes?" And let me lower this shit. The mute went off. I'm sorry. And I'll save it for you, Curtis. I'm sorry, my brother's here. And then I just started to feel like shit. And when I saw my eyes, I said, "Oh my God, do I have hepatitis or what the hell's going on?" Because I felt no pain, nothing. Anyway, they take me to the hospital, and they found a massive tumor on top of my pancreas. So you know what that means. Hello. I just wanted to let you guys know that if I go out and if I do meet that maker, he's got a lot of explaining to do. Remember when Ricky used to say, "Lucy, you got a lot of explaining to do." Well, if I meet that Lord and Savior, he's going to have a hell of a lot of explaining to do to this person.
Are you in the hospital right now, waiting for a procedure?
No, I got discharged. I was there for 16 days, and they put a stent in me from my pancreas into my liver because apparently all the biles and all that good stuff, that the Lord puts in our bodies, was backing up into my body, and I was being poisoned by my own fluid. Now then after that they did a few days later they did a biopsy to see, and they still have no results. They sent me home burning up with fever and in pain. Naturally they give you nice opiates, instead of finding out what the hell is wrong with you, they'll drug you up.
But they had you there for 2 weeks. What's the next steps for you?
What was that? I'm sorry.
They had you there for 2 weeks. What's the next step for you?
The next step is waiting for them to call me back so that they could do surgery and see what's going on. So let me know if it's benign or malignant. But I'm not feeling very well. So I mean, they said, they're hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. But I didn't want to leave this planet without telling you how much I loved you guys.
Oh, thanks so much. We
Good to be
genuinely
loved.
hope that you don't leave this planet. But I will say, I feel like I appreciate you updating us, and I hope for the best news. But I feel like you might need some rest. I can imagine I would.
Oh, rest. That's all I've
Yeah,
been doing for. I'm telling you, in a bed,
there you go.
not moving. Not even my bowels. Nothing is moving. Okay, nothing is moving. No toilet. Nada. So
They do put you on some
let's see
medication
what
to block
happens.
you up.
Oh yeah, they got me nice and stoned. And
Well, I wish I could give you a big old hug right now.
I wish I could hug you guys too. I send you a video of my Latin jazz group in your Facebook account.
Okay,
You can see
I
me
will.
swinging before.
I
You
will
know?
look for it.
And I just want to tell you all, tell Aron, Seth, you guys, my little redhead, tell all my babies down there, I love them all. And thank you for what you do, for awakening people up, man, to the reality, to being humanist, to being human beings, man. When you see somebody suffering, don't just walk by them and pray, because your prayers ain't going to feed them. Your prayers
That's
are
a
not
fact.
going to cure their thirst.
That is a fact. Thanks so much, Nadine. I hope
Okay.
call us back when they give you the update.
Thank you,
I
Nadine.
will, I promise. I love you guys.
We love you
Thanks for
too.
the
Take care
love.
of
For real.
See you
yourself.
later. She called me
Okay.
her little redhead. I'm not checking.
Yeah.
I know
I
there's
don't
more of
think
my head than there used to be. I don't know. I
think
told Natalie I don't think I'm losing hair. I think I'm gaining face. That's
yes.
another conversation. But she's a sweetie, and she knows how huggable we really are. You know,
That's true.
very huggable people.
We,
Very
we are,
huggable.
we are absolutely trying to be huggable on a regular occasion. So we got two more calls from theists queued up here right now. We're going to start with Jimmy in New York, who wants to have a conversation about civilization without religion. So welcome, Jimmy. How you doing?
How you doing, sir? Good afternoon, Seth. Good afternoon, Matt. Do you guys hear me perfectly?
Yes.
Pretty good.
Hello?
Yes.
Good. Yes, Matt. I want to ask you a question. I love your show. Your show is awesome. I've been watching it for years now. But my question to you guys is that how do you have civilization or morality without religion? It's impossible if it's just an evolutionary world.
Why is it impossible to have civilization without religion? I mean, civilization
Because
just
what's the motivation
requires a desire to live cooperatively, which is who we are.
Well, what would be the incentive? What would you do about? What would be the incentive for that then without religion?
Well,
what would motivate people to do that?
I couldn't invent a computer, or I couldn't build a road. I couldn't create the cell phone that I use, and so it's in my best interest to live cooperatively with people who can do those things. There are things that I might be able to do that somebody else can't. I'm not a doctor. It's in my best interest to live cooperatively with people who are experts on health, so that Nadine can get taken care of, so that I can have my triple bypass. But also, we're just social creatures. We tend to group and look out for each other. And the basics of game theory show that cooperation is the preferred solution in a number of different situations. Nothing about that requires religion.
But ma'am, okay. My question to you guys then: what does the government have power to lock people up or build jails then without religion? What do you get those? What do you get those things, right and wrong stuff, like right and wrong actions? Why would there be a jail? Why would there be need for a jail? Why would there be need for prison without having some sets of rules that you have to follow in society?
We have sets of rules. They just don't have to be based on religion.
It's based on what then? What's it based on?
Well, you're aware that there are a number of different non-religious philosophical views, like secular humanism.
I understand, but like I think you're not. I think you're not asking. I think you're not understand what my question is.
Okay.
Without religion, there'll be no motivation for it because there'll be no consequence for it. Like for example, why would rape be wrong? Why would murder be wrong? Why would stealing be wrong without religion? If it's just evolution that we got here
Are you
by.
saying, hey, Jimmy, are you saying without a religious model, I wouldn't know what harm looks like?
Correct.
So if harm was done to me then, and I was not a religious person, I wouldn't recognize that harm.
But no, it's not like you. It's not like you will not recognize it. But what would be the main factor
That's
to
a
stop
great
you from
place to
committing
start.
harm?
No. That's a great place to start. If I understand the concept of harm, someone steals from me, they physically harm me, hell, they abuse me emotionally or whatever, right? If someone does harm to me, then I understand the concept of harm. And wanting to live in a community, a society, I can then act toward others in a way that I would want them to act toward me. A cooperative pro-social model actually benefits me as it benefits everybody else. And because I understand harm, I also understand what is not harm. If I understand what is beneficial and good and moral and kind and loving and all those things on its own terms, then I can understand demonstrating that to others, the action-reaction thing that's happening in the human condition. There's no religion required to be able to build a society, a civilization around just our shared humanity. Yes?
What about punishment? Like, what if you meet someone that doesn't care? What about
No,
punishment? What would be the basis for the punishment?
No, if there are consequences for antisocial behavior, those are reinforcers for pro-social behavior. They are motivations for people to treat each other better. But we don't
By what
require a
authority,
religious. Pardon me?
By what authority? By what authority do you have? Like, for example, what authority gives you power over me? Like, why do you have to
Me.
follow rules if there's no like a rule giver, like the ultimate rule giver?
We as a society, we would be establishing a structure, a model for how outliers or antisocial behaviorists, for lack of a better way of saying it, for those doing harm, we'll say it that way, should be treated for the protection of everyone else and as a punitive measure against those who are doing damage. And so I resist this idea that I would have to believe in a higher power to know what harm looks like and to know how to deal with those who are being harmful. And beyond that, what religion would you be talking about? I mean, you're talking about religion in what sense? There are tens and tens of thousands of different religions. So which religion would you use to establish the model?
Okay, want me to be specific. I mean Christianity. Christianity is the one that tells you what is good, what is wrong, what is bad, what is right.
Jimmy, do other religions do other religions have concepts of right and wrong?
No, but those other religions, they're of the devil. They're not
Jimmy,
real. I'm talking about
do other religions have concepts of right and wrong?
And I told you, Matt, those other religions are of the devil, so they don't matter.
Jimmy,
what matters is
do
Christianity.
other religions have concepts of right and wrong? I'm going to ask you this question until you fail to answer it 4 times, and then I'll hang up on you. Do other religions have concepts of right and wrong?
To be honest with you, I don't know. To be honest, I do not know.
Wow. Then how do you know that their views aren't sufficient to create a civilization?
That's a very excellent question, Matt. Why I can say I grew up Christian, I don't know much about other religions. What I was told by my pastor that other religions are of the devil.
Okay, so let me ask you this. In your view of Christianity, is being gay okay, or is being gay immoral?
According to the Bible, it's immoral. It's against God's law. A man shall not sleep with a man as he does with a woman.
Okay, so under your view, it is immoral for a man to have sex with a man.
Correct.
Okay, you have that belief, and that belief you believe comes from God.
Yes, according to the Bible, sir. Yes.
Cool. So how does that give you any authority to tell any other human being what to do or enforce anything?
That's a very excellent question, Matt. We do it based on the Bible because we believe the Bible is God's word. That's why we have that authority, sir.
But I don't. And so if I don't get to impose my authority over you, why should you get to impose your authority over me?
This answer will still likely be the same because we believe that book is the word of God and you don't believe it. So that's the question.
Yes, I don't believe it. And even if let's imagine for a second that I believed that it was the word of God, that doesn't mean that I agree with it or have to follow it, right?
Yes, sir, that's true. But like for example, Matt, the laws of the land, if you don't agree with them, you go to jail. So same if you don't agree with God's law, you go to hell.
Yeah. In the United States, for example, do you go to jail for if a man has sex with another man, do they go to jail?
No, not now. No. Not no.
Should they go to jail?
If they want to apply the laws of the Bible, yes, they should go to jail.
Okay. Actually, no. If you want to apply the laws of the Bible, they should be killed, right?
That is yeah. That is in my opinion, that is harsh. But my opinion.
That's what the Bible says, though, right?
It's God's word. It's like I don't even have it. I don't even have power over it. That's what the Bible says.
You know what's really sad? Jimmy, is you're not able to see how there can be a society or a civilization or any sort of authority without a God. And I've already explained to you that the authority comes from us, that we are the ones that create the civilization and the rules of the civilization, and we can modify those as well. But when we push back on the very God and book that you believe in, once it gets to something that's a little bit difficult, you're fine with saying that it's immoral for a man to have sex with a man because the Bible says that. But you're not comfortable saying that those people deserve to die, which is what the Bible says. Why are you uncomfortable with part of what the Bible says, but not another part?
That's a very excellent question because I believe that civilization, things change with time, and the Bible was written a long time ago. It was written back in long thousands of years ago. So I think this change with time. So the punishment that was okay back then might not be okay today.
Jimmy, does God change?
God doesn't change, no, but people change.
So in the Bible, when the Bible says that if a man sleeps with another man as he sleeps with a woman, he's deserving of death, is that what God thinks?
According to the Bible, yes, sir.
So if God doesn't change, why would you say that was a long time ago and things change now?
Because we humans do change, but God doesn't change. It's not everything that is the Bible that I agree with,
so God still thinks that if a man has sex with a man, they deserve death, right?
Yes, sir.
So if you're going to be consistent with God, instead of making excuses about how you're uncomfortable with homosexuals dying, because that was a long time ago and we've changed, in order for you to be right with God, wouldn't you have to also agree that if a man has sex with a man, he should be put to death?
That's a hard one, but you're right.
Why don't you agree with God? Why don't you agree with God?
Because I believe the punishment is too harsh. That's why I believe they could change their behavior.
Have you talked to God about it? Have you asked God, you said, hey, God, I think this punishment's too harsh. What should we do about it? Has God given you an answer?
No, not concerning homosexuality. I'm not talking specifically concerning that issue of homosexuality. No, I'm not. Because I never thought of it that way, like the way you're bringing it up now, Matt. To be honest.
So why don't you go off and ask God? Say, hey, God, I think your punishment for homosexuality is too strong. Can you explain it to me?
I can do that, yes, no problem. But the Bible
Have you done that before about other things?
Have
you done that before about other things?
Yes, to be quite honest with you, yes. But the Bible, I went to my pastor, like lusting after ladies, like having a lustful heart, lusting after women. The Bible says adultery, but it's like it's something natural that human beings do. So how is that?
So you asked God about it? You asked God about it?
I didn't ask God particularly. I asked my pastor about it. My pastor said that's.
Oh, you asked your pastor. Why don't you ask God? Why would you ask your pastor instead of asking God?
my pastor is my pastor is a person I can really easily talk to. God is not easily to approach like that. You gotta have
Really? Why not?
It's hard. It's not that easy to approach God. It's like it is to approach your pastor. Your pastor is easily available to you. God is like someone that is in heaven that you have to really have a
How
pure
is it
heart
that
to approach him.
how is it that your pastor is more accessible and more available than God?
Because you see your pastor every day. You go to your pastor. No, it's not every day particularly, but you go to church. You see your pastor there. You talk to him,
Yeah,
and
but
he answers you. He answers your questions.
have you ever gotten an answer from God at all?
Exactly from God. To be quite honest, no, not really.
Cool. But your pastor answers you. How do you know your pastor's right?
That's a very good question, Matt. I just believe him because he's a man of God. He says he's a man of God.
What if he's not a man
Now,
of God?
wait. He's a man of God, or he says
Yeah,
he's a man of God. Those are two different things.
Yep.
that's why you guys are good. What I'm saying is that, wow. Yes, he says that he's a pastor. He believes in the Bible, so we believe that he's a man of God because he believes what he teaches from the Bible.
Matt, I don't want to walk on you. Can I jump in for just a second?
All you want.
Jimmy, you and I live in a culture where very often we afford some sort of a moral equity, extra equity to people who lead with, I'm a pastor, I'm a minister, I'm a reverend. For some reason, we have been conditioned to think, aha, they are a higher echelon of thinker and feeler. They are more moral. They can be more trusted because they are clergy. You lean heavily on your pastor and your pastor's word. But you've admitted right now you don't know if your pastor is a higher echelon of person talking to God or if he just says he is. The next question then has to be, if God would talk directly to your human pastor, it would be just as easy to speak directly to you as a human being. And the third thing, I don't mean to overwhelm you, but if you're struggling with God's command in the book of Leviticus, chapter 20, to execute gay people, if I, a non religious person, recognize harm and I say, I wouldn't want that as part of our society, I consider it immoral, wouldn't I actually have a better civilization than the civilization that God put in place in Old Testament times?
Yes, sir. To be honest with you, yes, you would.
I think we've covered a lot of good ground, right? We've established we not only need a religion to have civilization, to have community structure, to have pro-social behaviors, but in some cases, depending on the religion, we actually must reject the fundamental faiths, the superstitions and dogmas of our past, because they are in fact immoral. Would that be fair?
Yes, sir. But my question to you, sir, with due respect, sir, how do you know which one to reject? How do you know which one to accept?
How do I know which behaviors or deeds?
Yes, to reject, which one to accept? By what standard are you using? If it was like, that's the thing about it. Like, what standards like, for example, if I can ask you directly, sir, what standard does the government have the right to build jails, to build prisons? By what standard?
Well, hang on. I think rather than pinball it back to Matt, I don't mean to big for you
No,
here,
you're
brother.
fine. Keep going.
When you say government, I want to draw that back to society, right? Community,
Okay,
civilization.
society,
Okay,
yeah.
society. Societies put rules in place, structure in place all the time. Rewards for good behavior and punishments for bad or antisocial, destructive behaviors. And so, because we as those higher primates with evolved ethics can recognize what harm is, and it's imperfect. I don't know that I hold to absolute ethics. I don't an absolute moral standard. We get back to lying and those types of things. I think situational ethics are very complicated. But I think it's absolutely reasonable to say that we understand that it was cooperative societies that prospered. We survived and thrived because we were activated and working in pro-social ways. And because we can understand concepts like help and harm as they are done to us, we understand them as they are done to others. No religion required.
Wow. Okay. Okay. All right. So, okay. So we don't need so we don't need religion to establish society laws at all. So wow. Okay.
I don't need laws. Did I say that, Matt? I
No,
don't remember
No,
those
no. He
words.
said we
no,
don't
no.
need religion to establish a society of laws.
Oh, thank you for that clarification.
Cool. Hey, Jimmy, thanks for calling.
Yes, sir.
Spend
All
some
right,
time thinking
thank
about
you.
that, and if you
I will.
have other questions, call in. But also, if you have ways to justify your belief, I think you've got. I think we've given you everybody, including you and us, a lot to think about. So thanks, Jimmy.
No problem. No problem. Thank you. Have a great one.
I mean, he was honest enough to say, I was raised Christian, right? One of the major determiners for someone's not just religious belief, but the denomination, the flavor of their religion. Yeah, I was raised Christian. And then he admitted, I haven't done a lot of digging. I mostly listen to a third party, right? And I don't know anything really about the other faiths or non-faith. And he just said it. I mean, I don't mean to kick him in the teeth here, but what he was saying was, I've called to render an opinion, but I haven't done any homework on the subject. And I find that very telling. And I was struck me that he actually admitted it out loud.
No, it's fine. It's great when hey, there's a reason why when other people call in, it's, hey, we're going to ask a question. If you just answer the question that we're asking, things go so much better. And not because you're, playing by our rules. I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't get me wrong. I got a little glib at one point because that's an excellent question. Yes, I know it is. I've asked that question plenty of times and I've seen what it does and how it impacts people's thoughts. And that's the reason I ask it. There's reasons. I'd take 100 calls from Jimmy a week if we could actually ask a question, get an honest answer back, because Jimmy didn't leave here an atheist. Jimmy's not going to, he's got thinking to do. But he had at least some misconceptions about how do you have any authority to establish, laws. Well, if you look at the United States, it's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The power is invested in the people. The power to govern in the United States is not invested in a god. And the United States isn't beholden to a god or even a particular category of gods in any sense. And so, as you were pointing out, it's no God required to say, okay, we can create a list of rules. You know what? We could know nothing about the world and we could start exploring the world and then find something that's a problem and just make a rule. And as long as we have in our mind that we can update and modify that rule as soon as we get new information and better information, then you're now well on your way to establishing a system of rules that not only have a justification rooted in actual data and evidence about reality rather than what you think your God friend says. Not only is it rooted in that, but it has the incredibly powerful utility to change something that religions do reluctantly, if at all. The Bible, what the Bible says and advocates, has been the same since it was written. What people interpret from what the Bible says and advocates has changed because of other influences on Christian culture and Jewish culture. And the same is true, a Muslim in Bangladesh isn't necessarily going to have the same views as a Muslim in Michigan. The society that those are part of act as an influence on there. And so you've got, evidently there's a new show that's about, it's like secret Mormon wives' lives or something. And it's some kind of Mormon swinger thing. And I'm like, okay, I might go watch this, but what it shows you is that if you want to, as another caller did, simplify Islam down to this, you've already made a mistake. And if you want to simplify Christianity down to this, you've already made a mistake. Despite the fact that there's a label, as Seth was pointing out, there's thousands of denominations and they disagree on any number of things, including whether or not Jesus was fully man and fully divine, and whether or not the concept of a Trinity makes sense, whether or not we're living in post-millennial or premillennial times, whether or not there's, an afterlife and you are going to go to a hell, or whether or not annihilation theory is right. And, Seth and I will just cease to exist at some point. The world is more complicated than that. So I'm happy that, caller like Jimmy has a genuine concern about how can we have civilization without, a God. And one of the questions that I didn't get to ask, because there was so much good discussion all around, is let's imagine that the three of us, actually, we'll make it four, me and Seth and Jimmy and one of Jimmy's friends who also happens to be a Christian who agrees with Jimmy's take on things. Let's say the four of us become roommates. What rules are we going to have for the house? Are we going to, and what are they going to be based on? Like we have a 4-bedroom house. Each of us has our own bedroom. I would assume that we can do pretty much what we want in our individual spaces, provided it's not causing a problem for other people. If you're playing your music too loud in your room, that is impacting other people. If you're leaving food laying around in your room so that it draws ants and stuff, that's going to impact the rest of us. But if you want to go in your room and play video games, or meditate or have sex or whatever else, that's your space. And if we were to look at the common areas like the living room, the family room, and everything else, those should be available for all of us to use. And so, Jimmy, if you want to have a Bible study in our shared living room, I'm perfectly okay with that, provided I also get equal access to do an atheist meetup thing down in the living room. And that, it's really easy. None of those decisions in any way depended on a God. It was just pragmatic assessments of how are we going to share space. And the next question becomes, what's the punishment going to be if Matt plays loud music and leaves pizza boxes all over his room so that now there's varmints around? Well, we can then discuss that. We can say, okay, we're going to ask you to move out. Nope. Okay, we're going to ask you to pay for a cleaning service to come and clean up your mess. Whatever it is, there's a number of different ways to potentially deal with it. And yet, he looks at a book and his pastor doesn't know a great deal about what the book actually says. And this is a book that advocates for the death penalty for virtually everything. Have sex with a dude, you're deserving of death. Pick up sticks on the Sabbath, you're deserving of death. It is an oversimplification. The 10 Commandments is thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not murder. But if you look at U.S. law with regard to killing another human being, there's manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, negligent homicide, first degree, second degree, third degree murder. We recognize much more than our ancestors did a couple thousand years ago, that there are a number of different circumstances where one person might fatally injure someone else, sometimes with intent, sometimes without intent, sometimes, through negligence. And that each of these is different and has different consequences. Because if Seth's running around slaughtering families of 4 on the weekend because he gets a kick out of it, that's a little different than somebody else accidentally driving off the road and taking out a family of 4. But we can evaluate all of those things, and no God is required and no God benefits us. So the question that I didn't get to ask was this: if we create a society where we do not appeal to any God, how does appealing to a God make a better society than that? Imagine the best secular society that you can and show how adding a God to that, and in particular the God you believe in, improves it. The one thing you don't get to do is pretend that everybody in the system also sincerely agrees 100% with every one of your positions about God. Because of course the world would be better that way. To some extent, I mean, it's going to be worse in other ways, but if we're all in agreement, the scary thing is this: Project 2025 and other Christian dominionist, Christian nationalist views take over, they're not going to have the utopia that they thought they were. What they're going to have is a Christian nation of a particular type. And they're going to have prayer in schools, but it will only be Christian prayers of a particular type. And then all of a sudden, the Jews and the Presbyterians and the Pentecostals and the Baptists and the Catholics, well, they'll start to be at war with each other over differences in doctrine. We've seen it over and over again. We are living in what is the solution to religious strife and conflict and religious governance. And that is, let's govern without appealing to any of these religions and allow people to practice and worship in accordance with their conscience, right up to the point where their beliefs impact others. That's what we're fighting when we're fighting Christian nationalism. It's, you can think abortion is murder, you can think abortion is wrong, but you don't get to force everybody else to hold to your view. That's it. Oop, I lost my earbud. All right. We got a couple calls left, including a theist that's calling in. John is calling from Texas to say that the gumball experiment proves God. John, you want to go over, welcome, by the way. You want to go over the gumball experiment first so that we're sure we're talking about the same thing, and then explain how that proves a God and which God?
Yes, greetings. So the gumball experiment, pretty much in general, was first formed in 1907 by a guy named Francis Galton, and pretty much what it is he's pretty much the guy that figured out that by comparing people's guesses to, like, let's say in this example, an ox, by comparing people's guesses to how much the ox weighs, he found out that over time and over many different guesses, that once he had the median or the middle number out of all these guesses, it would tie down to the accuracy of the ox's real weight. And pretty much it's kind of like another way of saying, the wisdom of the crowd. The
Yes.
more people that guess on something, the more accurate the actual answer becomes. So that's what I mean by the gumball proving God.
Okay. Can you see the screen?
No, I'm not watching it.
Okay. Well, I have a Galton board in front of me. It's you mentioned Galton, and so I just happen to have this in front of me. It shows, well, I have it tilted a little bit, but it shows basically the standard distribution. There's nothing that forces any of these balls to drop down into any one or to produce that every time. This is just a demonstration of odds. So yeah, Galton demonstrated the kind of wisdom of the crowd, which is, on average, you're going to have some people who think there's 12 gumballs in there and some people who think there's 12 million gumballs in there. But as you work towards the median answer, you get surprisingly close. And what it shows is that we individually might be wrong, but an aggregate view, in some cases where we have statistical examples, we're going to get closer to right. How does that prove there's a God?
Well, I mean, just look at the universe and you look at how, the world has, and then the culture that, that we've learned over the years and our entire human history. I mean, you have, countries and different religions like Buddhism, Christianity, all sorts of different religions have, come up with a God, but they all point to the same thing, the same type of being. It may not be the same being because, every religion believes in different gods and all. But it's always, they always point to some sort of supernatural being, deity. And I mean, obviously you're going to have, like every experiment, like there's an example in the gumball experiment, you might have outliers and all. But I mean, at the end of the day, like I said, I mean, you have all these people coming up, with these answers about, whether or not there's a God. And, it's kind of fascinating because, I mean, it's different. It's funny how different parts of the world have said that a God exists, like I said, it might not be the same one, but the fact that people are mentioning it is something to really consider.
So I'm going to ask again, how does the wisdom of crowd prove there's a God?
because, like I said, like the more of an answer, the more of a guess you get, the closer you get to the answer. And so far from what we've been
No, no, no,
seeing,
no, no.
no,
The wisdom of the crowd in the gumball example is about statistical analysis where we have some experience with X and we are taking a collection of opinions and averaging them and hitting closely on it. This is the normative distribution that's on this Galton board. But that doesn't prove, by the way, that there's 723 gumballs in that jar at all. You prove it by counting it.
I mean, yeah, sure, you prove it by counting it.
So let's count.
That's
Let's count gods. Let's count gods. How many are there?
I don't know, probably like thousands, maybe millions. Everyone has their own interpretation of God.
Okay. Of those thousands or millions of God concepts, how many of them are real?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know, but I think the thing that matters the most here is the fact that, I mean, is there even a God being to begin with? I mean, that's the whole reason why I brought the gumball experiment, because, you know, I mean, at the end of the day,
I'm confused.
like,
I just asked you how many of them are real, and your response was to say that you think the whole issue is there a God at all? Isn't that what I just asked you?
Yeah, I mean, you can rephrase the question again. So I might have, misunderstood.
Okay. So are you familiar with an argumentum ad populum fallacy?
Yes.
What's that fallacy?
The fallacy is just because everyone agrees to it, or a lot of people agree to it, doesn't mean that it's true.
Okay. So how does the wisdom of the crowd demonstrate that a God exists in a way that does not fall prey to an argumentum ad populum fallacy?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't know. I mean, the only thing I can come up with, the reason why I even mentioned the gumball example to begin with is because, I mean, the reason why the wisdom of the crowd even works is because, people have different, that diversity of opinions. Some people's opinion, like you said, there's a billion denominations of gods, maybe millions. But the thing that matters here is that, each opinion is unique, which makes it more important because,
No,
it's
they're not
necessarily influenced. What happened?
Two people could have exactly the same guess as to how many gumballs are in there, and two people could have exactly the same opinion about how many gods there are, right? So they're not necessarily unique. That's not what the wisdom of the crowd is. The wisdom of the crowd says that essentially you're always going to get a normative distribution. I wish you could see the video since I had the Galton board up, but you're going to get a normative distribution.
Well, I mean, I'm watching it live.
You're going to get a normative distribution on multiple trials. The fact is, how many gods have we ever demonstrated in the history of the world?
Demonstrate? I mean, I don't know. Like, what do you mean by demonstration? I mean, God could be anything.
To show that they actually exist.
Well, I mean, we have, the Bible as an example. I mean, it's a historical.
Is the Bible a God that has been shown to exist?
Well, the Bible is a framework or a book that we can use as reference to show that God does exist.
The Bible is a book. How does it show that God exists?
I mean, the scriptures, they point how Jesus is true and all. And, stories that, that we've learned over time, the lessons that we've learned in the book, I mean, it's true. It's mostly true.
I don't get it. And how does the Bible show that God is real?
I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the book itself. I mean,
if the Bible showed that God is real, why would anybody need to appeal to the wisdom of the crowd?
Repeat that question again. Sorry.
If the Bible demonstrated that God was real, why would anybody need to appeal to the wisdom of the crowd?
Well, because, some people, like atheists, like they just don't believe the Bible is straight, they don't believe the book, the word of God. So, sometimes we have to come up with other things in order to convince others of what is true. which is why I brought up the gumball experiment, because I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning of the call, like you have all these other religions that have their own. I'm sure it may not be the same God they're talking about, but nonetheless, the God that they're mentioning. And at the end of the day, I mean, the whole point of the show is, you know, whether or not God is real. And I mean, you have all these bunch of people talking about, you know, how God is not real. You know, I don't know if God exists. God is real. But the whole point of the gumball, I guess, so to speak, is to prove that God does exist.
Yeah, actually, no, that's not the purpose of the gumball example, and it does not do that at all. Here's another gumball example for you. Let's imagine, with deference to Tracy Harris, let's imagine that I have 3 jars in front of me right now, since you're not looking, and one of those jars is full of gumballs that are the normal ones that you would see, and the second jar is full of invisible, undetectable, intangible gumballs, and the third jar is empty. How do you tell the difference between jar number 2 and jar number 3?
I mean, I can either see through jars, or can I not see them?
You can see through them.
Okay.
Do you think you can see
I mean,
invisible, intangible gumballs?
And I mean, I can't see what's not there.
Well, that's the thing, is one of these jars is empty and has no gumballs in it, and another one has invisible, intangible gumballs. How do I tell the difference between them?
They're invisible balls, but okay, when you say intangible, do you mean like not there, or like just like
Intangible
I want to make sure I know.
Means that you can't touch them, you can't feel them, you have no way of detecting them.
And the question was,
how do you tell the difference between a jar full of intangible, invisible gumballs and a jar that is empty? Don't they look the same to us?
You can't. I don't fucking know, to be honest.
Cool. Here, let's try it a different way. How do you tell the difference between a God that is hiding and doesn't interact with reality in a detectable way and a God that doesn't exist?
Well, I mean, the thing is, though, there's plenty of ways of proving God, though. I mean, like, I wouldn't say God is necessarily
John,
hiding.
that's not the question I asked. That's not the question I've asked. You've already failed. You've already failed multiple times to demonstrate that God exists. I'm asking a very specific question, which is, how do you tell the difference between a God that doesn't exist and a God that exists but hides so that you can't detect him?
But I don't believe in a God that hides. That's the thing.
John, did I ask you what you believe in? I asked you how you tell the difference between these two things.
A God that doesn't exist and God that hides?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either. But you seem to have detected a God. How'd you detect that God?
Well, based off of people's experiences and guesses, like, again, the gumball experiment, because, I mean, you have different people claiming that, you know, a God exists, and, you know, obviously you have other people that don't believe in that a God exists, but the whole point is you grab the majority of the answer, or at least the average answer, and there you go. I mean,
you don't. That's the fallacy we were talking about.
They matter. I mean, that's why,
so you just committed,
people go to church, because,
John,
you know, the experiences impacted them.
John,
yes,
I'm going to mute you if you don't stop talking. Do you want me to mute you so you stop talking, or just say, okay, here's the thing. You've just committed a number of different, I want you to listen, because you're the one committing fallacies here. You're the one who's committing an argument ad populum. You're the one that is committing fallacies regarding you should believe something if the majority of people believe that. What are you going to do when Muslims outnumber Christians? Are you going to convert?
Wait, I'm sorry. Okay. I mean, could you first point to me as to why I'm making that popular fallacy? Because, I mean, my thing is, though, that, like, we should take the answer that is the average, not the most.
So that's another fallacy, that the truth lies somewhere in the middle, or that the average answer is the correct answer. It's not. Those are all fallacies. When Muslims are more populous, when the average view is that the Muslim God is correct, are you going to convert to that one?
Well, I mean,
And do,
I'm not a
and do
Christian.
you go by the median, the mean, or the mode?
I go by the median. Median.
Okay. So when the median view is that the God of Islam is the correct one, are you going to convert to Islam?
Might as well, yeah. I mean, like, a God's a God. I mean, the whole point of the gumball is the point that, you know, a God even exists in the first place. I mean, if that God is true, then I'll believe in that God.
Yeah. So how do you know if it's true? Because right now the median is in one location and the median will change. If the median right now is Christianity and the median changes to Islam, did the God that exists change because we changed our opinion?
I wouldn't say necessarily because we changed our opinion. Maybe we just understood, you know, the type of God that we're dealing with. I mean,
John,
you know,
you're not thinking.
sometimes-
You're not thinking. Listen. You're not thinking. You just said that you'd go with whatever the median is because it's true. If the median changes, then the old median wasn't true, was it?
Not necessarily, because I mean, if they're
No,
both
no, no, no,
gods,
no,
I
no,
mean,
no, no,
you know,
no, no, no.
we
You
got
don't
part of
do
it
not
right.
necessarily.
It's just a
It is a
variation
fact.
of it that's wrong.
It is
you
a
know?
fact. If there is only one God, and we used to think it was the Christian God, and now the median is that it's the Muslim God, did the God change or did our opinion about the God change?
Repeat that question again. I want to make sure I understand it very closely. That way I can answer it
If
properly.
the median position was that the Christian God is real, and that median position changes to where the Muslim God is real, did the God that is real change, or did our opinion about God change?
I mean, I feel like we just got the God wrong. That's it.
So the median was wrong in the past, right?
Kinda.
How do you know it's not wrong now?
Because like going back to Gumball experiment, the majority of the answer, or the median answer, I should say, the more that we have the same overlapping answers, the closer we get every single time. That's the whole
I'm done.
point. That's the whole Gumball
I'm
experiment.
done.
I've enjoyed the
Well,
show.
man.
I have nothing to add. The law of probability or probability experiments prove God a specific God somewhere, but that God can change. I got nothing. I'm good.
It's just absolutely bizarre that somebody can sit there and spew fallacy after fallacy and
Well, I mean,
try to do this thing where, oh, we should go with the median because it's true. And then when you mention what if the median changes, then yes, we were wrong before. How do you know we're not wrong now? That you do not have a path to truth, John. You have no path to truth, and you don't understand that your arguments are logically fallacious.
well,
I'm
I
also
understand. Help me understand.
I'm also concerned about this idea that fact or reality is determined merely by public opinion or popular opinion. We look at human history and what we've called, fortunately, the knowledge economy has come a long way over the generations. But the majority of people, the aggregate opinion was once what? That the Earth had corners or was flat. That diseases or natural disasters were caused by the gods. This idea that popular opinion weights truth in a specific direction, to me, doesn't hold water. I would like to see us go much
I have a
deeper.
question to ask, though. Can I ask?
Sure.
I mean, but doesn't, for example, like laws? I mean, laws are one thing that we, for example, mostly agree on as an opinion. And I mean, so far that kind of proves to be right. Like, for example, most people can agree that murder is wrong because, I mean, if everyone were to murder each other, I mean, the world would be in chaos. It'd be destroyed. And
You
I
just
mean,
made an
so
argument that
far,
has nothing to do. You just made an argument that has nothing to do with what the median opinion is.
But I mean, how so? I mean, the median opinion is that murder is wrong, right? I mean, That's why
It's
people
not.
don't go
We're
out
not
killing
saying.
each other,
We're not
because
saying it's wrong. We're not saying it's wrong because it's the median opinion. It's the median opinion because we're saying it's wrong.
wait, slow that down. Say that again one more time.
I don't need to slow it down. So
Well, I mean, I just want
the one
I
thing
want to get the
about
right
the one thing
idea.
about the wisdom of crowds is that it needs to be a wide, independent sample. If you poll 100 Christians, you're going to get a very different result than you will from 100 Muslims or 100 Jews or 100 Hindus on what their God thing is. So that's where the sample thing comes in. Now you're looking at it as if, yes, but we've sampled everybody in the history of the world, and at least the overwhelming majority of them believe that there's a God. Correct. Is it possible that the overwhelming majority of them could be wrong?
Anything's possible. Yes, I agree. Anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it could
So
be
how
wrong.
do you
I
tell
mean,
the difference? How
we
do
have
you tell the
studies that,
difference?
people
How do
have
you tell
agreed.
the difference? How do you tell the difference between the majority being wrong and the majority being right?
I mean, just like all other religions, I mean, you just got to have faith, man. Faith leads to truth.
Okay. See you later, John. You just got to have faith. Faith leads to truth.
Wow.
No, it doesn't. Faith is not a pathway
Wow.
to truth. Faith is not reliable. I'm having difficulty believing that John was for real, but you know,
What's that hit line? It's called faith because it's not knowledge. I just love that line.
it's wild that we can go through and talk about the actual fallacies, and you know, you don't have to name them or anything else, but it's like the truth is that the wisdom of the crowd, and by the way, it didn't originate with Galton. It probably originated with Aristotle, but in a different sense. But Galton's work on probability is where that gumball experiment kind of comes from. And yeah, I showed off my Galton board. It's coincidence that I've had it here. I remember Forrest and I were doing a show and he mentioned, oh, if you ever look at a Galton board, and I was like, I got one right here. So what it is there's a bunch of beads here that sit in a reservoir, and it's going to come out a little skewed because I'm holding it and not doing it. But when you tip it, the normal standard distribution is what happens. There's nothing that guarantees that this is the structure necessarily. There's nothing forcing, oh, well, we've got 12 in this, column, so now we need to put one in this column. This is just about probabilistic distribution. Now I tilted that on purpose so you could see when the actual distribution of the balls doesn't line up with the normal distribution. It's all great stuff with probability, but at no point does it mean that the true answer is whatever the median is. But if you're going to, it's weird that you've got somebody who's calling in, advocating for the wisdom of the crowd and the median, doesn't know how to avoid an argument from popularity in some form or another. It's still the most popular that we're moving to. And then ends with, you just got to have faith. Well, you know what? No, I don't. Because I have this ability with my brain to say, I'm not convinced. I don't have enough information to reach the conclusion that a God exists. And in some cases, I may have enough information to reach the conclusion that a God doesn't. But you know what? I absolutely have enough information to conclude. I absolutely have a good enough understanding of logic and logical fallacies that we don't determine whether there's a God or not by polling people and going with the median response. The median response on any position we've ever had has changed at different times. Last couple of calls here. Glenn's calling from California. Glenn, pronouns are he, him. Welcome to the show. You're on with Matt and Seth.
How you brothers doing today?
Good.
Not bad.
That's it? I feel great. Oh, come on.
I'm glad you feel great. What's up?
Well, I watched something with Seth the other day, and it made me feel good. And I'll be honest with you. Your call screener said, well, what do you want to talk about? And I said, well, how about Satan?
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it was easy because Forrest talked about Satan the other day on Seth's show and went, well, how could you believe in a God if you already knew everything about that God and still said no?
I can't recall the
I'm
conversation he's talking about, and I don't know that I understand the question. Did you just
Yeah.
decide what you wanted to speak about when you called and spoke to Arden, or who's our screener today? I'm trying to.
Dragon is the screener today. Thank you,
Dragon
Dragon.
is the screener.
So,
Like,
so
I'm a
did you
fan of
have
let
it?
me
No. Go ahead. Go ahead, brother.
let me see if I understand, because I've talked about this before, Glenn. I used to use. I would ask people, why won't God reveal himself? And their answer was, because that would violate free will. If you knew that God existed, there's no way you could disobey. And my answer was always, did Satan disobey God? And did Satan also know? I mean, by the story, Satan has firsthand knowledge of God and has interacted with God, and yet still
Right.
disobeyed, which means that God could reveal himself to someone, and that would not necessarily make it so that it's a violation of any sort of free will. Is that your point?
Exactly.
Okay. Yes. I've talked about that before.
Yeah, I know you did. The only thing I would like to talk to you about, Seth, specifically, not Matt, because I
Okay.
called you about a year and a half
Have
ago.
fun.
Wow, really? You're hanging up on me?
Finish your sentence. Go ahead.
Well, I thought it was really fun. Bert Breathe made a video in 1985 that talked about July being Christmas, and I sent it to you, and it's just a wish for wings at work. And quite frankly, it supports atheism.
I don't
don't
know
have
the
a
message. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. I can't speak to it at all. I'm unsure of what the point of this conversation is. What is the point you would like to make, sir?
Well, if you believe in Satan, then you believe in Jesus, and you believe in all the other crap. Because
Not necessarily.
I think
not necessarily.
No, definitely. There is no God. There is no anything. We've got to fight for ourselves. And I don't tell you about a lot of the stuff. I know you personally, actually, but that's okay. I went to Teen Challenge. You probably have heard of that. I also went to Awanas, and I'm sure you know about that. So I have actually read the Bible just like both of you gentlemen. And yeah.
I think I'm good. I appreciate the call, Glenn. Have a good day. See you later.
You too. You take care, brother.
Did I miss anything?
You missed absolutely nothing.
Sweet.
Did you say we had one more?
Yep, one more. I had to pee real quick. So when he decided he didn't want to talk to me, although at the end he was like, you gentlemen, I was like, yeah, you don't need to reference me at all. I'm not involved in the conversation.
It's good. All good. All good.
Roberto in Florida
Hey.
you've made me incredibly curious, Roberto, because it says you're agnostic, and then it says that you're calling in because you say you can make a scientific case for the existence of God, which evidently is the same thing. Well, anyway, if you can make a scientific case for the existence of God, how could you be agnostic?
Well, I'm not. I don't believe. I'm just presenting the possibility, but there is a case. But first of all, let me set a level playing field with agreement here before we continue.
Well, before we do that,
go ahead.
If I had scientific evidence that confirmed that a God existed, I would have to believe that a God existed, wouldn't I? If I was rational?
You're right. You're right.
Okay.
So that's why I'm
So,
agnostic. I'm not sure if there is. I'm not sure if there isn't.
but you're calling in to say that you can scientifically demonstrate that a God exists, right?
Possibly philosophically.
Possibly
Okay, but
philosophically. I don't even know what that means. So I'll shut up now and you can tell us which God you're advocating for and what your case is for it, the scientific case for God. Go ahead.
okay, sure. So to set the level playing field here, let's agree on a couple of things. Okay, so can us three agree that science, and by the way, I'm not going to appeal to the God of the gaps. Okay, so can we agree that science has not been able to demonstrate everything about this universe? Like, for example, the origin of the universe, the origin of life, etc. Can we agree on that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so if we can agree on that, now can we agree that the multiverse hypothesis, or if it's even a theory, is a hypothesis that's on the table of scientists?
Not necessarily. I'm not convinced that the multiverse conjectures are falsifiable, which means they shouldn't count as a hypothesis. But if you just mean that it's a model that has been considered, then yes. But I'm not convinced that it's properly falsifiable.
Right. Okay. So back in the day when people thought that the Earth was flat, etc., since we didn't have enough evidence to prove the contrary at the time, just because people didn't have the evidence at the time and people thought the Earth was flat, doesn't mean that the Earth was flat.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So if this multiverse hypothesis a possibility?
I don't know.
Well, it's a yes or no question. It's either a possibility or it's not a possibility. So
Yeah, but if I don't know if it's a possibility, then the right answer is I don't know.
Correct. Correct. Okay.
So why is it that when you ask me if it, why is it that why is it what Roberto, why is it that when you asked me if it's a possibility and I said I don't know, did you act like I gave you an invalid answer?
I think it is an invalid answer because
okay, you're wrong. I don't know. You are wrong. It is not. It is the actual accurate answer. I do not know if a multiverse is possible or not. Possibility hasn't been demonstrated, and neither has impossibility to my knowledge. So my answer, I don't know, is in fact the correct 100% undebatable position that I have on that question. You are wrong. Continue.
Okay, I'll grant that. Okay, perfect. Okay, so it is a valid answer. So if by any chance the multiverse is correct, because obviously when we thought that the universe was static, did people think that the possibility that the universe was expanding or contracting was a possibility? Okay, you could say some of them said yes, some of them said no, some of them said I don't know. That's fine. But if the multiverse is true, if I'm not saying it is true, but if the multiverse is true, does there exist a universe, especially if it's an infinite, if it's an infinite multiverse, if there's infinite universes out there? If that theory is true, the multiverse, does there exist a universe where all these gods exist, or one of them exists, or none of them exist?
No.
Real quick, I'm so sorry to butt in before we go. We didn't realize, I should have asked beforehand, but Seth has a hard stop at 5, no later than 5:05. So let's make this call really quick. Thank you.
I can make this really quick. Roberto, this is a complete waste of time. We have no evidence that a multiverse is real or true. We don't know anything about it, whether or not it's infinite. We don't know if infinite possibilities and if every possibility is actualized in a multiverse. But we do have good reason to think that married bachelors don't exist in any universe because they're logically contradictory. And there's nothing
I
about
agree.
this that demonstrates the existence of a God. So try again another time. Thanks.
I
I mean, I just feel like when you build an argument upon something that is, you've already admitted, is it even a possibility? We don't know. Like, is the universe all hidden within a giant snow globe, which is being played with by a giant purple octopus? You think, well, and if that was the case, what if? And then you spun off into a bunch of other potential possibilities. I was just like, what's he talking about? Just crazy. Crazy.
This is one of the things, when you say, I'm an agnostic, but I can scientifically demonstrate that God exists. Well, if you could demonstrate that God exists, you should probably stop being agnostic. But if you're just going to say, hey, we haven't ruled out the possibility of a multiverse, and so if there's a multiverse, then maybe there's a universe where a God exists. Okay. And maybe there's a universe where you're fine. In the meantime,
thanks for letting me play along, man. It was fun hanging out with you.
Stole
Thanks,
from
brother.
Stephen Hawking. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks to Seth. Thanks to Dragon for screening our calls, and to all of our moderators. I just saw Jimmy Snow. Is he allowed to moderate in chat? Are we actually allowed to listen to that? Go to linemerch.com and go to patreon.com/call the line to support the organization, just in case we continue to get demonetized. Stay tuned. Sunday Show After Dark.